This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been a long-haul trucker for about 15 years, mostly southwest routes, though I go all over. That particular run was taking me from Phoenix to Atlanta with a full load of electronics. Nothing special about the job, just another long haul that I'd done 100 times before. That day had been brutal. I'd been pushing hard to make up time after getting delayed by an accident outside of Tucson. By the time I crossed into New Mexico, it was close to 2 a.m., and I'd been driving for almost 11 hours straight. My eyes were burning, and I kept catching myself nodding off. I knew I needed to stop before I became another statistic on the highway. When I saw the sign for the Coyote Springs rest area, I decided to pull in and catch a few hours of sleep. It wasn't a place I remembered stopping before, which is weird because I'd done that route so many times. Maybe I'd always just pushed through or stopped somewhere else. As soon as I took the exit, something felt off. The road leading to the rest area was completely dark except for my headlights, and there were no signs or mile markers that you usually see. Just this narrow, winding road that seemed to go on way too long for a rest area access. When I finally pulled in, the place looked half abandoned. There was just one street lamp working near the restroom building, and it was flickering like it was about to die. The rest of the place was pitch black. I could make out 2 other trucks parked at the far end of the lot, but they were dark. No lights in the cabs, no sign of the drivers. I pulled into a spot about halfway between the restroom building and those other trucks. Force of habit. I never park completely isolated or too close to others. As I cut the engine, the silence hit me. You know how rest areas usually have some background noise? The hum of engines from the highway, the occasional door slam, maybe even some distant voices. Nothing here, just dead quiet. I sat there for a minute, thinking maybe I should just keep going. But I was so exhausted I could barely keep my eyes open, and the next rest area was at least 60 miles away. I decided to use the restroom, then try to get a few hours of sleep before hitting the road again at sunrise. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the restroom building. The whole place looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Cracked concrete, weeds growing through, those informational boards all faded and peeling. The restroom door creaked when I pushed it open, and the inside was even worse. One flickering fluorescent light, dirty floors, and a smell that made me breathe through my mouth. While I was washing my hands, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate steps on the gravel, moving around the building. I figured it was probably one of the other truckers, but something about the rhythm wasn't right. The steps would stop for a few seconds, then start again, like whoever it was kept changing direction or pausing to listen. I called out, "Hello?" but got no response. The footsteps stopped completely. I hurried up, dried my hands on my jeans, and headed back outside, sweeping my flashlight across the area. There was nobody there. The parking lot looked exactly the same. My truck, the 2 silent rigs at the far end, and absolutely no one in sight. But then I noticed something that definitely wasn't there when I arrived. About 20 yards away, near one of the picnic tables, was a figure, just standing there, completely still. They were wearing what looked like a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up so I couldn't see their face at all. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound casual while my heart started racing. The figure didn't move or respond. I swept my flashlight directly at them, but they were just far enough away that I couldn't make out any features under that hood. Just darkness where a face should be. I took a step toward my truck, and the figure still didn't move. I took another step, and another, keeping my eyes on them the whole time, my hand gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles hurt. When I got to my truck, I unlocked it quickly and jumped in, locking the doors behind me. I looked back toward the picnic area, and the figure was gone. Just gone. I scanned the whole rest area with my eyes, but couldn't see anyone moving around. I sat there for a good 5 minutes, trying to calm myself down. There had to be a logical explanation, right? Maybe it was one of the other truckers, just standing there having a smoke or something, and they walked back to their rig while I was focused on getting to my truck. But why wouldn't they answer when I called out? And how did they move away so quickly without me seeing them go? I decided I was too tired and was probably just seeing things. I needed sleep badly. I made sure all my doors were locked, closed the privacy curtains around my cab, and settled into my bunk. I couldn't fall asleep, though. I kept listening for sounds outside, kept imagining that figure just standing there, watching my truck. I must have eventually drifted off because I woke up suddenly to what sounded like gravel crunching under boots. It was still dark outside, and according to my phone, I'd only been asleep for about an hour. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear. The footsteps were moving slowly around my truck. They'd stop, then start again, just like the ones I'd heard outside the restroom. I pulled back a tiny corner of my curtain and tried to see out, but it was too dark to make anything out clearly. Then the footsteps stopped right outside my driver's side door. I held my breath, waiting. That's when the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on my door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Before I could decide what to do, there were 3 more knocks on the passenger side door. That's when real fear hit me. Those knocks came at exactly the same time. There was no way one person could be knocking on both sides of my truck simultaneously. There had to be at least 2 people out there. I reached for my phone, thinking I should call 911, but there was no signal, not even 1 bar. The knocking continued, alternating sides now. 3 knocks on the driver's side, then 3 on the passenger side, then the back of the cab, then the front. It was like they were taking turns, circling my truck. I crawled to the front seat, staying low, and fumbled for the ignition. If I could just start the engine, hit the lights, maybe scare them off. As I was about to turn the key, the knocking stopped. Complete silence again. I waited, listening hard, but heard nothing. After about 30 seconds of silence, I slowly raised my head just enough to peek out the windshield. And there they were, 3 figures in dark hoodies standing in a triangle around my truck, 1 by the front bumper, 1 off to the side by the fuel tank, and 1 by the rear, all standing perfectly still, all with their hoods pulled up so I couldn't see their faces. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. When I did, I turned it hard and slammed my other hand down on the horn, holding it down while the engine roared to life. The horn blared through the silence, and I hit the high beams. Just then, another vehicle pulled into the rest area, its headlights sweeping across the parking lot. In that brief moment of illumination, I caught a clearer glimpse of the 3 figures. They weren't just wearing dark clothes. The fabric looked dirty, tattered at the edges. And where their faces should have been, under those hoods, I still couldn't make out any features. Just darkness, like the hoods were empty. As the lights from the incoming vehicle swept over them, they scattered. Not running exactly, but moving with this weird, jerky gait toward the edges of the rest area, disappearing into the darkness beyond the pavement. I didn't wait around. I threw my truck into gear and peeled out of that rest area like I was being chased by the devil himself. I didn't care about rest hours or logging at that point. I just drove and drove until the sun came up and I found a busy truck stop with lots of people and lights. I've asked other truckers about that Coyote Springs rest area since then. Most haven't heard of it, but a few older guys get this look on their face when I mention it. One of them told me that place has a reputation, said there have been truckers who stopped there and were never seen again. Their rigs found abandoned, no sign of the drivers. Another guy told me he'd heard the rest area was actually closed down back in the early 2000s after some kind of incident, though he didn't know the details. Said it shouldn't even be accessible from the highway anymore. I've tried looking it up since then. Can't find it on any current maps. Called the New Mexico.t once, and they told me there's no rest area by that name in the state. But I know what I saw. I know where I stopped that night. I don't do long overnight drives anymore if I can help it. When I have to, I only stop at busy, well-lit places with lots of other people around. Never pull into anywhere that feels off or too quiet. But the worst part is the dreams. I still have them at least once a month. I'm back in that rest area and those knocks start up again. 3 slow knocks, moving around my truck. And sometimes, in the dreams, I open the door to see who's there. I always wake up before I see what's under those hoods. And honestly, I'm grateful for that. Some things you're better off not knowing. To this day, I can't explain what happened at Coyote Springs, who those figures were, what they wanted, or why they were there. All I know is that I got lucky that night. That other vehicle pulling in probably saved my life. I've never been so happy to see headlights in my rear-view mirror as I was speeding away from that place. I keep telling myself it was just some local punks messing with a trucker, or maybe I was so tired I imagined some of it. But deep down I know better. Those weren't ordinary people. The way they moved, the way they just appeared and disappeared, the impossible knocking on both sides at once. It wasn't natural. Sometimes I wonder about those 2 other trucks I saw parked there. Were the drivers sleeping through all this? Were they even in their trucks? Or were they already gone? I'll never know. And I'll never stop at a remote rest area again, especially not in New Mexico. Some places just feel wrong from the moment you arrive, and Coyote Springs was definitely one of them. If you're ever driving through and see that exit sign, just keep going. Trust me on this one. It was November 18th, just before Thanksgiving. I was hauling industrial parts from El Paso to San Antonio, taking the less traveled roads to avoid the holiday traffic starting to build up on the interstates. The dispatch had me on a tight schedule, so I was driving through the night. Around 1:15 a.m., I hit this stretch of highway that cuts through nothing but desert. I'm talking absolute desolation. No houses, no ranches, not even the occasional fence line. Just darkness and cacti silhouettes under a new moon. My headlights were the only illumination for miles in any direction, and the radio had long since faded to static. I switched it off and settled into the quiet hum of my Peterbilt. The temperature gauge read 38 degrees. Cold for Texas, especially in the desert, and I remember seeing my breath fog up whenever I exhaled. I'd been driving for about 4 hours straight at that point, was still alert enough but thinking about pulling over soon at the next rest stop to grab a quick nap. I first noticed the headlights in my side mirror around 1:40 a.m. Nothing unusual about another vehicle on the highway, even at that hour. Truckers, travelers, people with places to be. I didn't think anything of it for the first few minutes, but after about 10 minutes, I realized something wasn't right. Whoever was behind me was maintaining the exact same distance, not gaining, not falling back, just there. At first, I figured it was just another trucker pacing himself with my taillights as a guide. We do that sometimes, especially on dark roads. I checked my speedometer, steady at 65 mph. Checked my mirrors again. The headlights were still there, same distance. I couldn't make out what kind of vehicle it was. Just two white beams cutting through the darkness. 20 minutes passed. The headlights hadn't changed position at all, not even slightly. Anyone who drives knows that's not normal. Even cruise control has variations. You speed up a bit on downhills, slow down on inclines. But this was mechanical precision. A cold feeling started creeping up my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I'm not easily spooked, but something felt wrong, really wrong. I decided to test it. Eased off the accelerator, watching the speedometer drop. 60, 55, 50. All the while keeping my eye on the rear view. The headlights should have gotten closer, right? But they didn't. They maintained the exact same distance behind me. My mouth went dry. I slowed even more. 45, 40, 35, 30 soireaux. The headlights stayed fixed in position, like they were attached to my truck by some invisible rod. That's when my heart really started hammering. I've been driving long enough to know that's not possible. Not unless someone is actively adjusting their speed to match mine exactly. But why would anyone do that? And how could they be so precise? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a sheriff or a highway patrol monitoring me, but they would have had their roof lights on, or at least passed me by now to check me out, and this was just plain headlights. Regular height for a passenger vehicle, not raised like a pickup or SUV. By now I'd been on this empty stretch for almost an hour, with these headlights following me for at least 30 minutes. My palms were sweating despite the cold cab. I reached for my CB radio. Breaker, breaker, this is Longhorn Sam eastbound on 62. Anybody out there copy? Over. Static. Dead air. Not unusual in remote areas, but it added to my unease. Any eastbound or westbound traffic on Route 62, this is Longhorn Sam at mile marker 117. Got a shadow vehicle on my tail. Anyone know who might be out here tonight? Over. More static. Then a burst of unintelligible noise that made me jump. Not a voice, more like electrical interference. I tried again, but nothing came through. I made a decision. Checking my mirrors one more time, I gradually applied the brakes until I came to a complete stop right in the middle of the highway. There wasn't a car in sight except for whatever was behind me, so there was no danger of causing an accident. The engine idled as I sat there, hands gripping the wheel. My headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, and my breath came in short, visible puffs. The headlights behind me had vanished. Just gone. I spun around in my seat, peering out the back window of the cab. Nothing but darkness, no taillights disappearing into the distance, no vehicle pulled over on the shoulder, nothing turning off onto a side road, not that there were any side roads out there. They had simply disappeared. I sat there for a solid 5 minutes, engine running, heater blasting, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. No, I'm not the type to hallucinate, and I wasn't overly tired. I'd seen those headlights clear as day, maintaining that impossible fixed distance regardless of my speed. Finally, with no other option but to continue my route, I put the truck in gear and started moving again. I kept my speed at a steady 60 mph, constantly checking my mirrors. Nothing behind me but empty road. After about 15 minutes of driving, I started to relax a bit. Whatever it was gone now. Maybe it had been some kind of optical illusion caused by the desert air. Or maybe the other driver had just turned off somewhere and I hadn't noticed. I reached for my thermos, took a swig of lukewarm coffee, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. That's when they reappeared. Same position, same distance, like they'd never left. I nearly choked on my coffee, spilling some down my shirt. The cold liquid soaked through, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on those headlights in my mirror. How? There had been nothing behind me for 15 minutes of straight, flat highway. No way a vehicle could suddenly materialize at that exact distance without me seeing it approach. I felt a spike of real fear then, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your mouth go dessert dry. Something was very wrong here. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing up to 70 km/h. The headlights matched my speed perfectly. 75, still there, same distance. My truck was loaded heavy, so I was already pushing its limits, but I needed to know if I could outrun whatever this was. Just as I hit 80 mph, the headlights suddenly began approaching. Fast, much faster than any normal car should be able to accelerate. I'm not ashamed to admit I panicked. I had this sudden, overwhelming certainty that I could not let those headlights catch up to me. Whatever was driving that vehicle, it wasn't right. I can't explain how I knew, but I did. My speedometer was pushing into the red zone. The steering wheel vibrated under my white-knuckled grip, and the whole cab was shaking. The engine roared in protest. I'd never pushed this old Peterbilt so hard, and I silently apologized to her as I kept my foot firmly on the gas. The headlights were gaining, closing the distance rapidly. In the side mirror, they looked brighter, more intense somehow. Not the yellow-white of normal headlights, but an almost blue-white that hurt my eyes. Just when I thought they were about to pull alongside me, they suddenly veered off to the right. Not gradually, like a normal car taking an exit or turning onto another road, but at an angle that would have been physically impossible at that speed without rolling over. The lights swept off into the desert, cutting through the darkness where there was no road, no path, nothing but scrub and sand and rocks. I watched them recede until they winked out completely, like someone had flipped a switch. I kept driving at high speed for another few minutes before finally easing off the gas. My heart was thundering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold. I felt lightheaded, almost delirious with relief and lingering fear. For the next hour, I drove in a state of hypervigilance, checking my mirrors every few seconds, expecting those headlights to reappear. But they didn't. The road remained empty. Around 3:30 a.m., I finally reached a gas station in a tiny place called Dust Bowl Junction. Little more than a few buildings clustered around the highway. I pulled in even though I had plenty of fuel. I just needed to be around normal people to reassure myself that the world made sense again. The guy working the night shift was an older man named Earl. His name tag said so. Gray stubble, baseball cap, looked like he'd been sitting on that same stool behind the counter since the 70s. I grabbed a coffee and some chips I didn't really want, just for an excuse to talk. "Quiet night?" I asked, trying to sound casual as he rang me up. "Mostly. You're the third trucker through here tonight." I hesitated, then decided to just ask. "You ever hear anything strange about Route 62? The stretch coming in from the west?" Earl gave me a long look, then reached up to adjust his cap. "You saw it, didn't you? The follower." I felt a chill run through me. "The what?" "The headlights that follow, but never catch up, unless you stop." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. "You know about it?" My voice sounded strained even to my own ears. Earl nodded slowly. "Had a few drivers mention it over the years. First time was back in '97, I think. Guy came in here white as a sheet, hands shaking so bad he could barely count his change. Said something followed him for 40 miles without catching up. Then when he stopped to see what it was, it vanished. Reappeared when he started driving again." "What is it?" I asked, leaning across the counter. Earl shrugged. Nobody knows for sure. Some say it's a ghost car from a wreck back in the 80s. Family of 4 hit head-on by a drunk driver. Others think it's something else. He paused. Something that just looks like a car because that's what we expect to see on a highway. Has it ever caught up to anyone? I didn't really want to know the answer. Not that I've heard, Earl said. But then again, if it did, maybe that person never made it here to tell about it. I paid for my stuff and went back to my truck. Sat there for a long time, engine off, just thinking. I'm not a superstitious man, never have been. I believe in what I can see and touch and explain. But what happened out there on Route 62? I can't explain it. I finished my route to San Antonio and made it back home to Dallas for Thanksgiving with my family. Didn't tell my wife or kids about what happened. What would I say? That I was chased by a ghost car? They'd think I was losing it. It's been almost 5 months now, and I haven't taken Route 62 since. I've turned down 2 jobs that would have put me on that road. Lost some money because of it, but I don't care. Some things are worth more than a paycheck. I still drive nights, still haul loads across Texas and beyond. But now I keep my radio on even through the static, and I never, ever stop on empty highways. And whenever I see headlights in my mirror maintaining the same distance for too long, I feel that same cold fear creep up my spine. I don't know what would have happened if those headlights had caught up to me that night. And I hope I never find out. I never thought I'd be sharing this. I've held on to it for 3 years, partly because I'm afraid people will think I've lost it, and partly because talking about it makes me relive that night. But I need to get this out. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar in those mountains. I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 12 years. The road is my second home, and I've seen just about everything. Accidents, wildlife, weather so bad it'll make your hair stand on end. When you drive for a living, you get used to the weird stuff. But nothing in those 12 years prepared me for what happened on Blackwater Pass. It was early November, about 3 years back. I was hauling a load of manufacturing equipment from Charlotte to a factory outside of Charleston, West Virginia, standard route through the Appalachians. I'd done it dozens of times before. That day started normal enough. I remember stopping for lunch at this diner I always hit on that route. Had my usual turkey club, extra pickles. The waitress commented on the weather, said a fog was rolling in earlier than expected. I didn't think much of it. Fog's just part of mountain driving. I planned my schedule to drive through the night. It's easier, less traffic, cooler temperatures, and I've always been a night owl anyway. By around 10 p.m., that fog the waitress mentioned had settled in thick. Not just regular fog, but that heavy mountain kind that seems to swallow your headlights. The kind where you can barely see 30 feet ahead. By 2 a.m. I was deep into the mountains. The road wound through Blackwater Pass, a stretch that's tricky even in good conditions. The fog had gotten so dense I had to slow to maybe 35 maybe high, carefully following the reflectors on the guardrails. The radio had gone to static about an hour earlier, normal for these remote areas, so I'd switched it off. That's when I first heard it. A whisper. So faint, I almost thought it was just air coming through a window seal. But all my windows were closed tight because of the cold. I adjusted my position, thinking maybe my jacket was making noise against the seat. The sound stopped. I relaxed a bit, focused back on the road. Then it came again. A whisper, definitely a whisper. Like someone was sitting right behind me, their mouth inches from my ear. But the words were all jumbled. I couldn't make out what was being said, just the sound of hushed speaking. I'm not ashamed to admit I freaked out a little. I turned on the cabin light and checked my mirrors. Nothing but my own reflection staring back, eyes wide and face tense. I remember laughing nervously at myself. "Get it together, Marie," I said out loud. "You're letting the fog mess with your head." I turned the light back off and cranked up the heat. Sometimes when I get tired, my mind plays tricks. Nothing unusual about that. Every trucker knows about highway hypnosis. 20 minutes later, the whispering returned, louder this time. Still unintelligible, but definitely a voice, or voices. It seemed to shift between one and many, like a crowd murmuring just below the threshold of understanding. I rubbed my eyes hard and slapped my cheek. "Wake up, Marie. Stop it." But I wasn't sleepy. I was wide awake, adrenaline already pumping through my system. That's when I noticed something in my side mirror, just a flicker of movement along the tree line that ran parallel to the highway. I squinted, trying to see through the fog. There it was again, a dark shape moving between the trees, keeping pace with my truck. I sped up slightly. So did the shape. I told myself it was just a deer, maybe a bear. These mountains are full of wildlife. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever was keeping pace with my rig was moving on 2 legs, not 4. The whispering got louder, and now it seemed to be coming from all around the cab. I turned on the radio, hoping to drown it out, but there was nothing but static. I switched it off again. That's when I saw it in my rearview mirror. A face. Not outside the truck, but inside. In the sleeper berth behind me. It was so pale it seemed to glow in the darkness. Hollow eyes, just empty black sockets staring back at me. The face was gaunt, with skin stretched too tight over bone. It wasn't moving, just watching me through the mirror. I screamed and instinctively turned around, nearly swerving off the road in the process. The sleeper berth was empty. Nothing there, no one. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the wheel with all my strength. Sweat was pouring down my back despite the cold. I kept my eyes firmly on the road ahead, terrified to check my mirrors again, but I had to. You can't drive without checking your mirrors. When I finally worked up the courage to glance at the rear view, it was back. That same terrible face, staring at me with those hollow eyes. But this time, its mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear. I didn't turn around again. I kept my gaze locked on the road and pushed my truck as fast as I dared in the fog. 45 meh, 50 meh. The curves were coming fast, and I knew I was driving recklessly. But the alternative, staying at a normal speed with that thing in my cab, felt worse. The whispering had gotten so loud now, it was drowning out the sound of my engine. Still garbled, still incomprehensible, but now with an urgency that made my skin crawl. That's when the radio turned on by itself. The static burst through the speakers, so loud I jumped in my seat. Then the static cleared, and through the speakers came a voice, deep, guttural, like rocks being ground together. "Marie," it said, just my name, nothing else. Then, "Marie, don't look back." I nearly drove off the road. No one should know my name. I hadn't passed another vehicle in hours. The CB had been silent all night. "Marie, don't look back," the voice repeated, louder this time. I couldn't help it. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again. The face was closer now, no longer in the berth, but right behind my seat. Those black hollow eyes were just inches from my headrest, and now I could see more of it. Wispy hair, a mouth that opened too wide, skin that didn't look quite like skin. I cried out and hit the gas hard. The speedometer climbed, 60, 65, 70. Way too fast for those roads, especially in fog. The truck swayed as I took the curves, the tires squealing in protest. "Don't look back!" the radio screamed, the voice no longer deep but high-pitched and terrified. The whispering had become a roar, like standing in the middle of a crowded room with everyone talking at once. My ears hurt from the noise. My eyes were fixed on the road, the fog swirling in my headlights. I don't know what made me do it. Call it human nature, call it stupidity. Whatever it was, I couldn't fight the urge. I had to know what was back there. I adjusted my mirror one more time. The face filled the entire mirror now. Those black holes where eyes should be seemed to pull at me, like they wanted to drag my soul out through my own eyes. Its mouth was stretched in a silent scream, rows of teeth visible, too many teeth. I floored it. The engine roared as I pushed my rig to speeds that would have gotten my license revoked instantly. The curves of Blackwater Pass came one after another, and I took them by instinct alone, my hands moving the wheel without conscious thought. The fog was so thick I couldn't see the road, just the faint glow of reflectors marking the edge of the pavement. I was crying, praying, cursing, all at once. Then suddenly, like someone had flipped a switch, the fog lifted. Not gradually, but all at once. 1 second I was driving blind. The next I could see stars overhead, and the road stretching ahead of me, winding down the mountain. The whispering stopped. The radio went silent. The weight of fear that had been crushing my chest eased slightly. I didn't dare check my mirrors. I kept driving. I drove until I hit the next town, a small place called Elkridge, just before dawn. I pulled into a truck stop, parked, and just sat there, shaking, for what must have been hours. When the sun came up, I forced myself to turn around and check the sleeper berth. Nothing, empty, just as it should be. I even got out and checked the entire truck inside and out. Nothing unusual, no scratches, no strange marks, nothing out of place. I called my dispatcher and told them I was sick. Took 2 days in a motel in Elkridge before I felt steady enough to drive again. Even then, I requested a different route back. Said there was construction on Blackwater Pass. They didn't question it. It's been 3 years since that night. I still drive long haul, still go through the Appalachians when I have to, but never on Blackwater Pass and never in fog. Sometimes, when I'm on a lonely stretch of highway late at night, I think I hear that whisper starting again, just at the edge of my hearing. When it happens, the radio sometimes crackles, even if it's turned off, and through the static, I swear I can hear that voice. "Marie, don't look back." And I never do. I keep my eyes on the road ahead, and my mirrors adjusted just enough to see the traffic behind me, nothing more. Some things you don't want to see twice. I don't know what was in my truck that night. I don't know if it was real, or if the fog and the isolation played tricks on my mind. All I know is that the fear was real, the voice was real, and whatever was in my mirror, real or not, is something I never want to see again. So that's my story. Take it for what it's worth. Maybe I hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe I dozed off at the wheel and my brain conjured up a nightmare to wake me. Or maybe there's something on Blackwater Pass that doesn't want to be seen, doesn't want to be known. All I can say is this: if you're ever driving through those mountains and the fog rolls in, keep your eyes on the road ahead. And whatever you do, don't look back. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest even after all this time. It happened 3 years ago when I was working at Clearview Diner, this small restaurant just off the main highway in my hometown. I was 22, trying to save money for college while figuring out my life. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. December was always slow in Clearview. It's a small town where everybody knows everybody, and around Christmas, most people stayed home with family or went to the fancy places in the city. That night, December 23rd, was particularly dead. A light snow had started falling around 8 p.m., and by 10, I'd served maybe 5 tables total. My manager, Sarah, had left early, trusting me to close up since I'd done it dozens of times before. Last table, then freedom, I remember thinking around 10:30 as I wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time. The only customers left were an older couple finishing their pie, regulars who always tipped well and never stayed too late. Then the bell above the door jingled. 4 men walked in, stomping snow off their boots onto our already dirty welcome mat. They were loud, laughing and talking over each other in a way that immediately filled our small diner. I felt my stomach tighten. Something about them seemed off from the moment they entered. The leader, I didn't know his name was Darius then, headed straight to a booth in my section. He wore a worn leather jacket with patches I couldn't quite make out, and had this scruffy beard that looked like it hadn't been properly groomed in weeks. The others followed him like loyal dogs. They all seemed to be in their mid-30s, rough around the edges. I grabbed 4 menus and approached their table with my customer service smile. "Welcome to Clearview Diner. Can I start you guys with some drinks?" "Coffee for me, sweetheart," the leader said, looking me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. "And make it strong. We've been driving all night." I nodded, jotting it down, trying to keep things professional. The older couple paid their bill and left while I was getting the coffee, leaving me completely alone with these men. I considered texting Sarah to come back, but I didn't want to seem paranoid over nothing. As I served their drinks, the one with the beard, Darius, leaned forward. "What's your name, honey?" "Maya," I answered automatically, regretting it immediately. "Maya," he repeated like he was tasting the word. "Pretty name for a pretty girl. You work here long, Maya?" I gave a vague answer and tried to take their orders quickly. The whole time, Darius kept his eyes on me while his friends snickered among themselves. They ordered burgers and fries. Nothing complicated, thank God. I rushed to the kitchen to put the order in, taking longer than necessary just to avoid going back out. When I brought their food, Darius patted the seat next to him. "Why don't you sit with us a while, Maya? Slow night, right? Keep us company." "Sorry, I have to clean up for closing," I said, forcing a smile. "We close at 11. One of his friends checked his watch. "That's only 15 minutes from now. You kicking us out already." "No, of course not," I said quickly. "Take your time eating. I just meant I need to start cleaning up other areas." Darius smiled. His teeth were surprisingly white against his scruffy face. "Don't worry about us. We'll make it worth your while." He pulled out a 20 and set it on the table. "Just for you, separate from the bill." I mumbled a thank you and retreated to wipe down empty tables, keeping myself busy while staying in view of the security camera above the register. The 15 minutes crawled by. 11 o'clock came and went, and they showed no signs of leaving. They were taking their time, nursing their coffees, watching me. At 11:20, I finally worked up the courage to bring their check. "Whenever you're ready, no rush," I said, placing it on their table. Darius grabbed my wrist before I could pull away. His grip wasn't painful, but it was firm enough that I couldn't easily break free. "What's the hurry, Maya? Got a boyfriend waiting?" I pulled my hand back, my heart racing. "No, I just need to close up." "No boyfriend? Pretty girl like you?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "Maybe you need someone to show you a good time." His friends laughed. One of them, a guy with a buzz cut and tattoos creeping up his neck, added, "Yeah, we could show you a real good time." I felt sick. "I really need to finish closing. I said, stepping back. Darius stood up suddenly. He was taller than I'd realized, probably 6 feet or more. "All right, boys. Let's not keep the lady waiting." He threw some cash on the table, definitely more than their bill. "That should cover it." Relief washed over me as they started putting on their jackets. I went to the register to count their money, my hands shaking slightly. They paid and left, but Darius lingered at the door. "See you around, Maya from Clearview," he said with a wink before following his friends out. I locked the door immediately, my stomach in knots. Through the window, I watched them get into a beat-up pickup truck with out-of-state plates. They didn't drive away immediately. They just sat there, engine running, exhaust creating clouds in the cold air. I finished closing as quickly as possible, counted the register, wiped down the surfaces, and turned off the main lights. The whole time I kept glancing out the window. The truck was still there for about 10 minutes, then finally pulled out of the parking lot. I watched its taillights disappear down the highway before heading to the back door that led to the employee parking lot. The employee lot was small, just a patch of gravel behind the restaurant with space for maybe 5 cars. That night, my old Honda Civic was the only one there, parked under the single flickering security light. I'd always hated that light. It created more shadows than illumination. Tonight it seemed especially menacing. I stepped outside, locking the back door behind me. The air was biting cold and the snow had picked up. I pulled my coat tighter and fumbled for my keys, just wanting to get home and forget about those men. 10 steps to my car. 8. 6. Maya. My blood ran cold. I whipped around to see Darius leaning against the dumpster, smoke curling from his mouth. Either from a cigarette or the cold, I couldn't tell. He was alone. No sign of his friends or their truck. "You forgot something," he said, pushing himself off the dumpster and walking toward me. I gripped my keys tighter, sliding one between my knuckles like my mom had taught me years ago. "What are you talking about? Where are your friends?" "They're waiting down the road." He was closer now, close enough that I could smell cigarettes and whiskey on his breath. "I told them I wanted a private word with you." "I need to go," I said firmly, though my voice wavered. "My boyfriend is expecting me." The lie came out automatically. Darius smirked. "That's not what you said inside." He stepped closer. "Look, I just want to talk. Maybe get your number. We're passing through again next week." I shook my head. "I'm not interested. Please leave me alone." His expression changed then. The fake charm disappeared, replaced by something cold and hard. "Don't be like that. I'm being nice here." He reached for my arm. "Just give me your number. We can have some fun." I jerked away. "No, leave me alone or I'm calling the police." He laughed. "With what phone? I don't see one in your hand." My phone was in my purse, which was hanging from my shoulder. I'd have to dig for it. Too slow. "You think you're too good for me?" His voice had dropped to a growl. "Stuck-up bitch." He lunged forward and instinct took over. I swung my hand with the key between my knuckles, aiming for his face. I felt it connect, dragging across his cheek. He yelled and stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. I didn't wait. I turned and ran the last few steps to my car, fumbling with the lock. Behind me, I heard him cursing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the door. "You fucking cut me!" he shouted. The door finally opened. I threw myself inside and locked it just as his hand slammed against my window. His face was contorted with rage, a thin line of blood trickling down his cheek where my key had caught him. "Get out of the car!" he demanded, pounding on the window again. "You're gonna regret that." I jammed the key into the ignition. "Please start, please start." The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Darius was still yelling, trying the door handle. I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas harder than I meant to. The tires spun on the icy gravel before catching. As I backed up, Darius tried to run alongside the car, still reaching for the door handle. I turned the wheel sharply, causing him to slip on the ice and fall. I didn't stop to see if he was okay. I shifted into drive and floored it, racing around the building and onto the main road. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I kept checking my rear-view mirror, terrified I'd see that pickup truck following me. The 5-mile drive to my apartment never felt so long. I ran red lights. I sped. I took random turns just in case he was following. When I finally reached my apartment building, I parked as close to the entrance as possible and ran inside, constantly looking over my shoulder. Once in my apartment, I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing noises, imagining Darius and his friends had somehow found where I lived. The next morning, I called in sick, then drove to the police station to file a report. The officer who took my statement was kind, but not particularly hopeful. Without a last name or a clear license plate number, there's not much to go on, he explained. We'll keep an eye out for the truck, but if they were just passing through, he was right. They never found Darius or his friends. I quit my job at the diner the next week. Couldn't stand the thought of working there anymore, especially at night. I found a morning shift at a cafe downtown where there were always people around. For months afterward, I jumped at every sound. I changed my routes to and from work. I took self-defense classes. I bought pepper spray and kept it on my keychain. I never parked anywhere dark or isolated. I still don't. It's been 3 years. And sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, imagining what might have happened if my key hadn't connected, if my car hadn't started, if I hadn't gotten away. The not knowing is the worst part. Not knowing who he really was or what he wanted. Not knowing if he's still out there, if I'll ever turn around in a grocery store or gas station and see that scruffy beard and cold eyes again. I learned something that night, something I wish I never had to learn. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. And sometimes, survival isn't just about running. It's about fighting back when there's no other choice. I still have the same key. I keep it separate from my others. Sometimes I look at the tiny scratch on it, the only evidence of what happened that night, and I wonder if Darius has a scar to match. I've always been the adventurous type. My friends used to joke that I'd never stay in one place long enough to grow roots. Travel was my passion. My escape from the mundane 9-to-5 grind of marketing work in San Francisco. I'd save every penny, plan meticulously for months, then take off on solo trips that made me feel alive, until Costa Rica, until Victor. It's been 8 months since I got back, and I still haven't unpacked my backpack completely. It sits in my closet, half empty, like some sort of weird memorial to the person I used to be, before the fear. Costa Rica was supposed to be my dream trip. I'd spent a year learning Spanish, researching coastal towns, mapping out hiking trails, and saving enough to spend 2 full weeks exploring without worrying about money. The first 4 days were exactly what I'd hoped for, better even. I stayed in this charming little Airbnb in Samara, a beachside town that wasn't overrun with tourists. It had this amazing balcony with a hammock where I could watch the sunset while sipping local coffee. Each morning, I'd wake up early, grab breakfast at this tiny bakery run by a local family who quickly learned my name and my order. pan dulce, and a café con leche. I'd spend my mornings hiking through the nearby forest reserves, afternoons lounging on different beaches, and evenings sampling local restaurants. I felt so independent, so capable. God, I miss feeling that way. That fifth day started like the others. I woke up early and hiked a challenging trail that led to a breathtaking waterfall. I swam in the cool water, took about 100 photos, and felt that rush of accomplishment that comes from exploring somewhere new. By evening, I was pleasantly exhausted and decided to try a restaurant I hadn't noticed before. A small place tucked away on a side street with string lights and plants hanging from the ceiling. It looked authentic, not touristy, which was exactly what I was searching for. The restaurant was about half full when I arrived, mostly locals and a few travelers. I grabbed a small table near the back wall, ordered a local beer and their fish special, and started flipping through photos from my hike on my phone. The food was incredible. Fresh fish with some kind of mango salsa that I still dream about sometimes. That's when I felt it. You know that prickly feeling when someone's watching you? I glanced up and immediately locked eyes with an older man sitting alone across the room. He had this weathered, sun-damaged skin that told me he'd spent decades under the Costa Rican sun, salt and pepper hair pulled back in a small ponytail, and dark eyes that didn't look away when I caught him staring. I quickly looked back down at my phone, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Maybe he was just curious about a solo female traveler. That happens. But when I looked up again a few minutes later, he was still watching me, now with a slight smile that made my stomach twist. I tried to ignore him and focus on my meal, but I became hyper-aware of his presence. I could feel his eyes on me while I ate, while I paid my bill, while I gathered my things. I was just about to leave when he approached my table. "You are American, yes?" His English was heavily accented but clear. He stood too close to my table, invading my space in a way that made me instantly uncomfortable. "Canadian," I lied, not wanting to give him any real information about myself. "Just passing through." "I am Victor," he said, extending his hand. I reluctantly shook it, noticing how he held on a beat too long. His palm was rough, calloused. "It is not safe for beautiful women to travel alone here. Many bad people would take advantage." The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'm fine, thank you," I said, pulling my hand away. "My boyfriend is meeting me back at our hotel." Another lie. Victor's smile widened slightly. "No boyfriend. I have seen you alone every day. Always alone." My blood went cold. He'd been watching me for days. Before I could respond, he pulled out the chair across from me and sat down uninvited. "You stay in the blue house on Calle Mariposa, yes? With the white hammock on the balcony." My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. How did he know where I was staying? Had he followed me? Had he been watching my comings and goings? "I need to leave," I said, standing up abruptly, grabbing my bag and nearly knocking over my water glass in the process. "I will walk you," Victor said, standing as well, "for safety." "No," I said firmly, though my voice shook slightly. "No, thank you. I'm meeting someone." I turned and walked quickly toward the door, feeling his eyes on my back. Outside, the evening had turned dark, and the street was quieter than I expected. I headed toward my Airbnb at a brisk pace, fighting the urge to run. After half a block, I glanced back and felt a surge of panic. Victor was about 20 feet behind me, walking in the same direction. I picked up my pace, my mind racing. Was I overreacting? Maybe he lived in this direction. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But my gut was screaming that something was very wrong. I took a sudden right turn down a street that wasn't on my route home, hoping he would continue straight if he wasn't actually following me. When I looked back again, my heart sank. He had also turned. He wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. Now I was genuinely scared. I pulled out my phone, pretending to take a call, speaking loudly about meeting my friend in 5 minutes. I even described what she was wearing so I could spot her. Victor kept the same pace behind me, neither closing the distance nor falling back. I spotted a small convenience store still open and ducked inside, grateful to see a young couple shopping and an older woman behind the counter. I pretended to browse while watching the entrance. A minute later, Victor walked by slowly, looking inside as he passed. He didn't enter but continued down the street, stopping at the corner where he could still see the store entrance. I approached the cashier and, in my broken Spanish, tried to explain that a man was following me. She understood enough to look concerned and called over her teenage son from the back room. After some quick conversation in Spanish, too fast for me to follow, the son offered to walk me home. We left the store together, and sure enough, Victor was still there, watching. When he saw me with the young man, he finally walked away, disappearing around a corner. The kind teenager walked me all the way to my Airbnb, and I thanked him profusely, feeling momentarily safe. Once inside, I double-checked all the windows and doors, pulled all the curtains closed, and called my host to explain what happened. She assured me the house was secure and offered to come by, but I didn't want to inconvenience her at 9 p.m. She promised to call the local police to report the incident and have them drive by during the night to check on the house. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe Victor was just socially awkward and had poor boundaries. I FaceTimed my sister back in California, not telling her exactly what happened because I didn't want to worry her, but just needing to see a familiar face. After we hung up, I took a long shower, trying to wash away the unease that clung to me like a second skin. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I first heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the bedroom window. At first I thought it was a tree branch, or maybe rain starting to fall, but there was no wind that night, and the sky had been clear. The tapping continued, deliberate and patient. I froze in my bed, phone clutched in my hand, too terrified to move toward the window, but needing to know what was causing the sound. I slid out of bed and crept across the room, staying low. With trembling fingers, I pulled back the edge of the curtain just enough to peek out. There was a face pressed against the glass. Victor's face, yellowish in the dim light from the street lamp, smiling at me. His eyes widened when he saw me looking back, and his smile grew broader. He raised his hand and waved, like we were old friends meeting by chance. I scrambled backward. A scream lodged in my throat. I ran to the bathroom, the only room without windows, and locked myself inside, dialing the emergency number with shaking hands. I tried to explain in my terrible Spanish, then switched to English, begging for help. The operator seemed to understand the urgency, if not all my words, and assured me someone was coming. While I waited, huddled in the bathtub with the shower curtain drawn, I heard more tapping, this time at the bathroom door. My heart nearly stopped. Had he gotten inside the house? "Emma," a voice called softly through the door. It was my name, my actual name. I hadn't told him my name. "Emma, don't be afraid. I only want to protect you." I covered my mouth to stifle a sob. How had he gotten in? I'd checked all the locks. I'd been so careful. "The police are coming," I managed to say, my voice stronger than I felt. "They're almost here." The tapping stopped. There was silence for a moment, then the sound of footsteps moving away from the door. I strained to hear where he was going, what he was doing in my temporary home. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then I heard sirens approaching, and the most beautiful sound in the world. Car doors slamming and voices calling out in Spanish. I stayed frozen in the tub until I heard knocking at the front door and officers identifying themselves. When I finally opened the bathroom door, the house was empty. The police searched every room, every closet, under the beds, behind the curtains. Victor was gone, but he'd left evidence of his intrusion. The kitchen window had been pried open, and there on the counter was a small carved wooden figure of a woman, alongside a tropical flower I'd seen growing near the waterfall I'd visited that morning. The police took my statement, photographed the items he'd left, and searched the area around the house. They found footprints in the soft soil beneath several windows, suggesting he'd been circling the house, looking in different windows before finding a way inside. They promised to patrol regularly throughout the night and suggested I find different accommodation for the remainder of my trip. I couldn't bear to stay in that house another minute. My host arrived and helped me pack my things, then drove me to a hotel in a busier part of town where there was 24-hour security. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound, checking and rechecking the locks on the door and windows. The next morning, I went to the police station to file a formal report. They took it seriously, especially when I mentioned that Victor knew which house I was staying in without me telling him, and that he knew my name. They showed me some photos of known local troublemakers, but Victor wasn't among them. I spent that day in the hotel room, researching flights home. I was supposed to stay another 9 days, but I couldn't. The magic of the place was gone, replaced by a suffocating fear that followed me everywhere. I managed to get a flight out the following afternoon, paying an extortionate amount for the last-minute booking, but it was worth every penny. That final night in Costa Rica was the longest of my life. I pushed a chair against the hotel room door, kept the bathroom light on, and sat up watching mindless TV shows on my laptop to stay awake. I ordered room service rather than venturing out and jumped every time someone walked past my door. The drive to the airport the next day was tense. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Victor following the taxi. At the airport, I didn't relax until I was through security, surrounded by other travelers and airport staff. It's been 8 months since I got back to San Francisco. 8 months. And I still wake up sometimes to the phantom sound of tapping on my window. I've moved to a 5th-floor apartment where no one can reach my windows. I've installed a security system that would impress a bank vault. I've started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and hypervigilance that followed me home. The worst part isn't the nightmares or the panic attacks. It's the loss of something I loved so deeply. My independence, my freedom to explore the world on my own terms. I used to feel so alive when traveling solo, so capable and strong. Now I can't even go to the corner store without checking who might be following me. I find myself scanning crowds, convinced I'll see Victor's weathered face watching me from across a busy street, or in line at the coffee shop, or in the reflection of a store window. What if he somehow found out my full name? What if he knows where I live? These thoughts consume me at the most random moments. My friends try to understand, but they can't, not really. They encourage me to get back on the horse and travel again, maybe with a companion next time. They don't understand that it's not just about having company. It's about the violation of safety. The knowledge that someone can decide to target you for no reason other than you caught their eye. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the police hadn't arrived when they did. What was Victor's endgame? Was he just trying to scare me? Did he have more sinister intentions? I'll never know. And somehow that uncertainty makes it worse. I'm trying to rebuild my confidence, step by tiny step. Last week I went hiking at a local park with a group, something I wouldn't have done a few months ago. But I still checked over my shoulder the entire time, still felt my heart race when a stranger got too close. The rational part of me knows that Victor is thousands of miles away in Costa Rica. The traumatized part of me is convinced he could be anywhere, watching, waiting. Until those two parts reconcile, I remain trapped in a prison of my own fear, looking for a way back to the fearless traveler I used to be. I still can't believe what happened at Westmont Grand. It's been 3 weeks and I'm still shaking when I think about it. I just need to get this off my chest because I don't know who else to tell that wouldn't think I'm absolutely insane. Landing that job was supposed to be my big break. I'd been grinding through culinary school, working double shifts at mediocre restaurants, eating ramen every night while my classmates went out. All that sacrifice was worth it when I got the call to be a line cook under Marco Delacroix at Westmont Grand. If you're into fine dining, you know his reputation. 2 Michelin stars, features in all the major food magazines, waiting list 3 months long. The guy's a genius with food. I was beyond ecstatic. My first day, I was so nervous I nearly cut my finger off prepping vegetables. The kitchen was immaculate, all gleaming stainless steel and precision. Marco ran a tight ship. He wasn't a screamer like some chefs, but something about his quiet intensity made everyone work twice as hard. He'd just look at you with those dark, deep-set eyes, and you'd feel like he was looking straight through you. The first week was normal, exhausting 14-hour days, but normal. I was in heaven learning his techniques. The way he built flavors was unlike anything I'd seen before. People would take one bite of his signature dish, this black truffle risotto with aged Parmesan, and literally close their eyes in pleasure. I saw hardened business executives actually tear up eating his food. It was bizarre, but I chalked it up to exceptional cooking. It was during my second week that I noticed the first weird thing. We'd closed for the night, and I was finishing cleanup when I realized Marco was still there. Most head chefs bounce the minute service ends, leaving the sous chef to handle closing. But Marco was meticulously packing something into a small wooden box. When he saw me watching, he slipped it into his bag so quickly I almost missed it. Then he smiled, this smile that didn't reach his eyes, and asked why I was still there. I mumbled something about being thorough and left, but it stuck with me. After that, I started paying more attention. Marco always stayed late, and he was weirdly protective of the walk-in refrigerator. You know how in most restaurants, anyone can go in and out of the walk-in. Not at Westmont Grand. Only Marco and his sous chef Antoine had keys after hours. He claimed it was to preserve the integrity of our premium ingredients, but I'd never heard of that anywhere else. There was this one night, must have been my 3rd Tuesday there, when I stayed extra late to perfect a complicated sauce technique. Everyone else had gone. I thought Marco had left too until I saw a light on in the back hallway. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept down the hall and saw Marco unlocking the walk-in. He had that same wooden box plus a canvas bag that looked heavy. He slipped inside, not completely closing the door behind him. I waited a few minutes, debating whether to leave or look. My better judgment lost. I tiptoed to the door and peered through the crack. What I saw, I still get chills thinking about it. Marco had moved aside some shelving to reveal a small space at the back. There was this crude altar set up on a low table, red candles burning, symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal on the stainless steel wall. A a clay bowl filled with something dark and viscous that I prayed wasn't blood. Marco was kneeling in front of it, chanting something in a language I couldn't recognize. Not French or Italian or Spanish. Nothing that sounded remotely familiar. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. I backed away, nearly knocking over a mop bucket. The sound must have alerted him because the chanting stopped abruptly. I ran to the locker room, grabbed my stuff, and left through the back door. I don't think he saw me. I seriously considered quitting right then. But this was Westmont Grand. Career opportunities like this don't come twice. So I showed up the next day, acting normal, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood what I saw. Maybe it was some weird meditation thing. Some chefs are eccentric, right? But deep down, I knew better. I started noticing other things too. The clientele at Westmont wasn't just wealthy. They were obsessed. The same faces night after night. People who should have been too busy and important to eat at the same restaurant repeatedly were there 3, 4 times a week. They'd order different dishes each time, devouring everything with this intense, almost desperate hunger. There was this one woman, mid-50s, dripping in diamonds, CEO type, who I saw 6 nights in a row. On the 6th night, I overheard her tell her dining companion that she'd canceled a trip to Paris because she couldn't bear to miss even one night of Marco's cooking. Who does that? The staff talked about the Westmont regulars with a weird mix of pride and unease. They joked that the food was addictive, but nobody seemed to think it was actually strange. I tried bringing it up with Liz, another line cook, asking if she thought it was weird how people kept coming back. She just shrugged and said, "That's Westmont magic." Magic. The word stuck with me. I started watching Marco even more closely. He had this ritual before each service. He'd go into the walk-in for exactly 7 minutes, sometimes carrying small pouches of herbs that didn't look like any culinary herbs I recognized. He'd emerge looking energized, focused, almost glowing with intensity. Then he'd personally finish every signature dish, adding what he called his final touch, a sprinkle of something from a special container he kept in his pocket. I managed to glimpse inside it once. It looked like salt, but with these tiny dark flecks mixed in. When I asked about it, he called it his secret blend and said the recipe would die with him. But the weirdest thing was how the restaurant never had a bad night. Never. In the restaurant industry, that's unheard of. Every place has off nights. A supplier delivers bad ingredients, someone calls in sick, the kitchen gets overwhelmed. But not Westmont. Every single night was perfection. Critics always raved. Customers always left deliriously happy. Until one night when everything went sideways. A health inspector showed up unexpectedly during dinner service. Marco went pale when the host came back to tell him. The inspector started in the dining room checking temperatures and storage, but we all knew he'd eventually come to the kitchen. Marco pulled Antoine aside and whispered something urgent. Antoine nodded and disappeared down the hallway toward the walk-in. Marco was unusually distracted during service. He knocked over a sauce, something I'd never seen him do. The inspector finally came back to the kitchen, and Marco personally guided him around, charming and professional. Everything seemed fine until the inspector asked to see the walk-in refrigerator. Marco's smile froze. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Antoine, the key, please." Antoine handed it over, and I noticed his hands were trembling slightly. The inspector and Marco disappeared into the walk-in. They were in there maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. When they emerged, Marco looked relaxed again, and the inspector was smiling broadly, complimenting the organization. As soon as the inspector left, Marco's demeanor changed completely. His face turned hard, his eyes cold. He barked at Antoine to meet him after service, then locked himself in his office for the rest of the night. I knew something was wrong. After we closed, I hid in the dry storage closet near Marco's office. I heard him and Antoine arguing in hushed, furious tones. "You were supposed to move everything," Marco hissed. "I did. I got rid of the candles, the bowl, everything," Antoine protested. He saw the markings. I had to intervene. "Again? Marco, that's the third time this year. The energy required to... Do you want to lose everything we've built? Everything we've sacrificed for?" Antoine fell silent. Then he asked quietly, "Who's it going to be this time?" Marco sighed. "Table 7, the banker. No family lives alone. Nobody will notice for days." My blood ran cold. Were they talking about what I thought they were talking about? "Tomorrow night, then," Antoine said. "I'll prepare the walk-in." I stayed frozen in that closet long after they left. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. I told myself I was misinterpreting, that there was a rational explanation. But deep down I knew. The next day I was a mess. I dropped things, burned myself twice. Marco noticed and asked if I was feeling all right. His concern seemed genuine. But those eyes, they didn't seem human anymore. I mumbled something about a stomach bug and kept working. I watched Table 7 all night. An older man, expensively dressed, dining alone. He ordered the tasting menu with wine pairings, and when the signature black truffle risotto came out, Marco personally served it, adding his special touch tableside. The man took a bite and closed his eyes in that familiar expression of rapture. But when he opened them again, there was something vacant in his gaze, like he wasn't fully there anymore. After service, Marco asked me to stay late to prep for tomorrow. I agreed, my heart pounding. I needed to know for sure. I needed evidence. Once everyone else had gone, I pretended to be working in the pastry station, which gave me a clear view of the hallway. Sure enough, Marco headed for the walk-in, wooden box in hand. I waited 5 minutes, then followed. The door was slightly ajar again. Peering through, I saw the altar was back, more elaborate than before. The symbols on the wall were drawn in something red and wet-looking. The bowl in the center contained what was definitely blood, still liquid, and Marco was standing over it, knife in hand, chanting. My phone was in my pocket. I carefully took it out and started recording. I needed proof, but as soon as I hit record, every light in the walk-in flickered. Marco stopped mid-chant and turned directly toward the door, toward me. His eyes, I swear they were solid black, no whites visible. "Jordan," he said, in a voice that didn't sound entirely his own, "I've been wondering when your curiosity would get the better of you." I stumbled backward. He pushed the door open fully and stepped out, still holding the knife. "You don't understand what you're seeing," he said. "I understand enough," I managed to say. "The altar, the chanting, the way customers keep coming back. You're doing something to them." He smiled slightly. "Doing something? I'm giving them what they want, the most transcendent culinary experience of their lives. Is that so wrong? That man tonight at Table 7, what did you do to him?" Marco sighed, like a teacher disappointed in a promising student. "Success requires sacrifice, Jordan. Surely you understand that. You've sacrificed for your career. I sacrifice for mine." "By killing people?" The words came out as a whisper. "Not killing, transforming. Their energy feeds the ritual. Their essence enhances the flavors. It's a beautiful symbiosis, really." I backed away further. "You're insane." "No," he said calmly. I'm a visionary. Do you think a restaurant achieves this level of success through skill alone? Do you think people become obsessed with food without a little enhancement? I'm leaving, I said, and I'm going to the police. He laughed then, a sound that made my skin crawl. With what? A story about black magic and a walk-in refrigerator? They'll think you're insane. He stepped closer. Besides, you're not the first to discover my methods. Why do you think Antoine is so loyal? Why do you think none of my previous sous chefs ever speak about their time here? I realized with horror what he was implying. You killed them? Some of them. Others saw the wisdom in joining me. He held out the knife, handle first. You have potential, Jordan, more than most. I've been watching you. You could be part of something extraordinary. For a split second, and this is the part that still haunts me, I actually considered it. That's how compelling he was. The promise of success, of being part of Westmont's legacy. But then I remembered the vacant look in that banker's eyes, and I snapped out of it. No, I said firmly, and turned to run. I felt something tug at me, not physically, but like a pull on my consciousness. Marco was chanting again, those strange, guttural sounds. My legs felt heavy, my thoughts foggy. I fought against it, picturing the exit in my mind, forcing my body to move. I heard him behind me, still chanting but moving too. I knocked over every cart, rack, and tray I passed to slow him down. I burst through the back door into the alley and ran like I've never run before. I didn't stop until I was on a crowded street with other people around. I never went back, not even for my final paycheck. I blocked Marco's number when he tried calling the next day. I've been staying with a friend, afraid to go back to my apartment. I've thought about going to the police, but like Marco said, who would believe me? I have the video, but it only shows a few seconds of him standing by some candles before the lights flickered and the recording went grainy. The terrifying thing is, Westmont Grand is still operating, still packed every night, still getting rave reviews. I saw a food critic on TV yesterday calling Marco's cooking supernaturally delicious and impossibly addictive. If they only knew. I can't help wondering how many people have disappeared over the years, their essence used to enhance Marco's dishes. How many curious employees figured out too much. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can hear that chanting again, even though I'm miles away from the restaurant now. And the worst part, sometimes I still crave that food. Even knowing what I know, there are moments when I would do anything to taste that black truffle risotto one more time. Is that just my memory of great cooking, or did he somehow get to me too? Is part of me still connected to whatever dark force powers Westmont Grand? I don't know what to do. All I know is that behind the glittering facade of the city's most exclusive restaurant, something monstrous is feeding on people's life force, binding them to return again and again until they're completely consumed. And nobody seems to notice or care because the food is just that good. I never thought something like this would happen to me. Everyone hears stories, but you always think, that's terrible, but it won't be me. Then one day it is you, and nothing prepares you for how it feels to know someone is watching your every move. I'm 19, and after high school, I decided to take a gap year to save up for college. Pinewood isn't exactly bursting with opportunities, so I was grateful when I landed a waitressing job at Marlene's Diner on the edge of town. It's one of those classic places with vinyl booths, checkerboard floors, and the same locals coming in day after day. Nothing exciting, Just a safe, normal job in a safe, normal town. At least that's what I thought. He started coming in about 3 months after I started working there. At first, there was nothing special about him, just another customer. Adrian was maybe 25 or 26, average height, brown hair, usually wearing jeans and button-up shirts. He always sat at table 7 by the window, always ordered a black coffee and the Turkey Club sandwich, and always left a decent tip. I didn't think twice about him. In the beginning, he was just friendly. "How's your day going, Lily?" Normal small talk, nothing weird. I actually thought he was kind of nice compared to some of the grumpy regulars we got. He'd come in 2 or 3 times a week, usually during my afternoon shifts. Looking back, I should have noticed when things started changing. The comments began so gradually that I almost didn't catch it. "That color looks really nice on you," turned into, "You should wear that shirt more often, it fits you perfectly." One day he asked if I had a boyfriend, and when I gave a vague answer, he smiled in a way that made my stomach knot up. Then the questions got more personal. Where did I go to school? What did I do on weekends? Where did I want to go to college? Did I live nearby? Each time I'd try to give vague answers or change the subject, but he was persistent in a way that became increasingly uncomfortable. I remember the exact moment when I realized something was seriously wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, about 6 weeks after he first started coming in. The diner was nearly empty, and Adrian had been sitting at his usual window seat for over an hour, long after finishing his sandwich. I was wiping down the counter when I glanced up and caught him staring at me. Not just looking, but staring with this intensity that made my skin crawl. When our eyes met, he didn't look away or seem embarrassed. He just smiled. That same day, I noticed him still sitting in his car in the parking lot when I took the trash out. He was just sitting there, and I'm almost positive he was watching the diner. I hurried back inside and asked my coworker Danielle to walk me to my car when my shift ended. After that, I started noticing him everywhere. He'd linger in the parking lot after leaving. Sometimes I'd spot his blue Honda Civic parked across the street, just sitting there. Once I saw him walking on the sidewalk outside the grocery store where I was shopping. Could have been a coincidence, but by then my internal alarm bells were ringing non-stop. My manager, Rick, wasn't helpful at all when I mentioned it. "He's a paying customer, Lily. Just be professional. He probably has a little crush. He'll get over it." I tried to explain how uncomfortable it made me, but Rick just rolled his eyes and told me to lighten up. Then it got worse. One afternoon, Adrian came in as usual. When I brought his check, he handed me a folded piece of paper along with his credit card. I thought maybe it was a note asking me out, which would have been uncomfortable enough. But when I unfolded it in the back room, my blood went cold. It was a photograph of me working behind the counter, clearly taken from outside the diner without my knowledge. I was refilling salt shakers, completely unaware I was being photographed. I immediately showed Rick, my hands shaking. His response? What, it's not illegal to take pictures in a public place. I couldn't believe it. I asked if we could at least ban Adrian from the diner, but Rick refused, saying he didn't want to create drama with a regular customer. I tried to switch my shifts around after that, working mornings when Adrian usually came in during afternoons. It worked for about a week. Then he started showing up during my morning shifts too. He always knew exactly when I was working. Someone must have been telling him my schedule, or he was watching the diner enough to figure it out himself. The day everything changed started normally enough. I finished my morning shift and drove home to my small apartment about 15 minutes from the diner. As I pulled into my spot, I noticed a car that looked like Adrian's driving slowly past the complex, but it was gone before I could be sure. I told myself I was being paranoid. When I walked to my car that evening to go grocery shopping, there it was. Another photograph, tucked under my windshield wiper. This one showed me walking from the diner to my car after my shift the previous day. But the truly terrifying part? In the background was my apartment building. He had followed me home. He knew where I lived. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone to call the police. When they finally arrived, the officer seemed sympathetic but unhelpful. Has he threatened you directly? No. Has he attempted to physically harm you? No. Has he explicitly stated he intends to hurt you? No. Their conclusion? There wasn't much they could do. They suggested I document everything and call back if he made any direct threats. I spent that night at my friend Megan's place, too scared to stay alone. I called in sick to work the next day and the day after that. I was terrified of running into Adrian, but also terrified of being alone in my apartment. On the third day, I forced myself to go back to work, asking Danielle to meet me in the parking lot before my shift. Adrian didn't show up that day, or the next. For a brief moment, I thought maybe he'd given up. I was wrong. When I checked my mailbox that evening, there was an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Lily, I know where you live now. We don't need to meet at the diner anymore. I'll see you soon. I drove straight to the police station, still in my work uniform, clutching the note in my shaking hands. This time they took me seriously. The officer explained I could file for a restraining order, which I did immediately. They also sent a patrol car to my apartment complex and promised to keep an eye on the area. I quit my job at Marlene's that same day. Rick tried to convince me to stay, saying, "You're overreacting. We need you for the weekend shifts." I hung up on him. My parents helped me move to a new apartment across town the following weekend. I stayed with them for 2 weeks while waiting for the new place to be ready. During that time, I jumped at every sound, checked over my shoulder constantly, and barely slept. My dad installed extra locks and a security camera at the new apartment. The restraining order was granted. The police showed Adrian's picture to other employees at the diner, who confirmed he'd been asking about my schedule and personal information. They served him the order at his workplace. Apparently, he worked at an insurance office one town over. The officer who spoke with me afterward said Adrian seemed surprised, but didn't cause any problems. It's been 4 months since I moved. I found a new job at a bookstore where the security cameras and multiple employees make me feel safer. I haven't seen Adrian since that last day at the diner, but that doesn't mean I feel safe. Even now, I check my rearview mirror obsessively when driving. I've memorized the faces of every regular customer at the bookstore. I close my curtains as soon as I get home and never leave windows open at night. I've stopped posting on social media entirely. My friends think I'm being paranoid, that it's over and I should move on. But they don't understand. They didn't feel what it's like to know someone is watching you, learning your patterns, following you home. They don't know what it's like to wonder if every car that drives by slowly is him. If the sound outside your window at night is just the wind or something worse. Last week I was shelving books at work when I got that feeling, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck like someone was watching me. I turned quickly, scanning the store, but saw nothing unusual, just customers browsing books. But for a split second I could have sworn I saw a familiar blue Honda drive past the storefront. The police say I did everything right. The restraining order means he can't come near me, my home, or my workplace. If he violates it, they can arrest him. But restraining orders are just pieces of paper. They don't stop bullets or knives or hands. They don't erase the knowledge that someone out there knows what you look like, knows your patterns, your habits. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel normal again, if I'll ever walk to my car without keys clutched between my fingers, if I'll ever stop checking closets and under the bed before I can sleep, if I'll ever trust a friendly customer asking casual questions. The worst part isn't even the fear that he might come back. It's knowing that for those months I was being watched without realizing it. How long had he been following me before I noticed? How many photos did he take that I never saw? What else does he know about me? I used to think stalking was something that happened to celebrities or in movies. I never imagined it would happen in a small town like Pinewood, to someone as ordinary as me. I never imagined how it would change every aspect of my life, how I'd have to calculate risk in every mundane decision, from which parking spot to take to whether I should go for a run alone. My therapist says I have PTSD. She says it will get better with time, that I need to reclaim my life and not let fear control me. Easy to say when you're not the one who found photographs of yourself that you never knew were taken. Yesterday, I received a letter at my new address, a place that should be unknown to him. It was just a blank greeting card, nothing written inside, no return address. The police said it could be anyone, could be a mistake, could be junk mail, but I know. Somehow he found me again, so I'm packing, again, moving to a different city this time. I'll change my phone number, my email, my hair color. I'll use a different name at work. I'll become someone else, if that's what it takes. Because the truth is, I don't know if he's still watching. I don't know if he ever stopped. And I don't know what he wants from me or what he'll do next. All I know is that somewhere out there is a man who decided I belonged to him somehow, who invaded my life and my peace of mind. And I can't shake the feeling that no matter where I go or what I do, he's just waiting for the right moment to let me know he's still there. Every knock at the door, every unknown caller, every car that passes too slowly, it could be nothing, or it could be him. That's what it's like to be stalked. You never really feel safe again. The watching never really stops, even if he does, because now I'm the one watching, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for him to return. I haven't talked about this in years, but I need to get it off my chest. Even typing this makes my hands shake, but I have to tell someone what happened to me last summer. I grew up in a small town about 40 minutes outside of Oak Ridge Valley. City life had been grinding me down for years. The noise, the traffic, the constant pressure. I couldn't take it anymore. After my divorce finalized, I decided to head back to my hometown for a while, stay with my parents, and clear my head. One morning, I woke up early and decided to visit this fishing pond I used to go to as a teenager. It wasn't on any maps, just this perfect little hidden spot that only locals knew about. My dad showed it to me when I was 12, and I spent countless summer days there catching bass and just sitting with my thoughts. I packed my old fishing gear into my dad's truck. He let me borrow it for the day, grabbed some sandwiches my mom made, and headed out around 6 a.m. The drive there was exactly how I remembered it, about 15 minutes on the main road, then a dirt path that winds through the woods for another 10 minutes. I had to park and walk the last half mile through pretty dense forest. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw that pond, it was like stepping back in time. Crystal clear water, lily pads around the edges, dragonflies skimming the surface, nobody around. Perfect silence except for birds and the occasional splash of a fish jumping. I actually felt myself relax for the first time in months. I set up my chair and tackle box at this flat rock outcropping that I always used to fish from. The morning sun felt amazing on my face, and I just sat there for a while breathing the clean air before I even cast my line. I can't explain how peaceful it was. Around noon, I'd caught 2 decent-sized bass, catch and release, eaten one of my sandwiches, and had a beer. I remember thinking how stupid I was for staying away so long. Why had I tortured myself in the city when this place existed? I was even considering moving back permanently. That's when everything changed. I first noticed the ripples on the water. At first I thought it was just a big fish, but then I saw what was causing them. A small plastic boat, like one of those cheap single-person fishing boats you can buy at Walmart. And there was someone in it. The pond isn't huge, maybe 200 yards across, so I could see him pretty clearly as he paddled towards the middle. A man looked to be in his late 40s or maybe early 50s, wearing this faded red baseball cap. And even though it was at least 80 degrees, he had on a carcinet, one of those thin windbreaker jackets, dark blue or black, I think. At first, I just figured he was another fisherman who knew about the spot. It was disappointing because I wanted to be alone, but it's not like I owned the place. I gave him a little wave, but he didn't wave back. That's when I noticed his eyes. Even from about 50 yards away, I could tell they were fixed directly on me. Not looking around at the scenery, not focusing on fishing, just staring right at me. And he wasn't blinking at all. I tried to ignore it and went back to my fishing, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. When I looked back up a few minutes later, his boat had drifted closer, maybe 30 yards away now, and he was still staring, just watching me. My heart started beating faster. Something felt really wrong. I called out, "Catching anything?" Just trying to break the tension, He didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken, just kept staring with those unblinking eyes. I started packing up my stuff. I didn't know why, but every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave. As I was collapsing my chair, I looked up again, and he was even closer now, maybe 15 yards away. I hadn't heard him paddle. It was like his boat had just silently glided across the water. That's when he spoke, and his voice made my blood run cold. "I can't let you leave." His voice was completely flat. No emotion, no inflection. Just a statement of fact. I laughed nervously and said something like, "Just heading out for lunch. Plenty of fish for everyone." Stupid small talk. But I was terrified. He didn't respond, just kept staring. Then he slowly reached his right hand into his jacket pocket. When I saw the gun, everything inside me just stopped. It wasn't a big gun, just a small black pistol. But in that moment, it might as well have been a cannon. I froze completely, still holding my collapsed chair. "I can't let you leave," he repeated in that same flat voice. I dropped everything, my tackle box, my chair, my rod, and I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan, just turned and sprinted into the woods toward where I'd parked the truck. I could hear splashing behind me like he was paddling furiously to reach the shore. The half-mile trek through the woods now felt like a marathon. I kept tripping over roots and branches, scratching my arms and face on thorns. I was hyperventilating, my lungs burning. The whole time, I was imagining a bullet hitting me in the back. I don't know if he was following me. I was too terrified to look back. All I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. When I finally reached the truck, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I kept dropping it on the floor. When the engine finally started, I peeled out so fast I sent rocks and dirt flying everywhere. The whole drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced I'd see his face or that red baseball cap. I blew through stop signs. I was crying and didn't even realize it until I tasted salt on my lips. When I got to my parents' house, they weren't home. Thank God. I didn't want to explain the state I was in. I locked all the doors and closed all the blinds, then sat in the living room with my dad's old baseball bat across my knees. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? Some guy at a fishing pond scared me. He had a gun, but I hadn't actually seen him pointed at me or threaten me with it directly. And I couldn't even clearly explain where the pond was. It wasn't on any maps. As the hours passed, I started to calm down a little. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe he was just some weird, socially awkward guy who carried protection in the woods. Maybe. But then night fell. My parents called to say they were staying overnight at my aunt's place a few towns over. I was alone in the house. Around 11 p.m., I was in my old bedroom, still wide awake, staring at the ceiling. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel driveway outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I froze, holding my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped right below my window. I could see a shadow through the blinds, someone standing there, perfectly still. Then the voice. That same flat, emotionless voice. "I know you're in there. I can't let you leave," I almost screamed. Instead, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering frantically to the operator. While I was on the phone, I heard the doorknob rattling downstairs. He was trying to get in. The operator told me to stay on the line and find a secure room. I locked my bedroom door and pushed my dresser in front of it, then hid in the closet with the baseball bat. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, shaking, clutching that bat. It felt like hours. At some point, I heard sirens in the distance getting closer. When the police arrived, they searched the entire property. They found nothing, no sign of anyone. The officer asked if I'd been drinking or taking any medication. I could tell he didn't really believe me. They took a report, but I could see in their faces they thought I was just some city guy spooked by country noises. They promised to drive by the house a few times during the night and left. I didn't sleep at all. When my parents came home the next morning, I made up some story about having to get back to the city for work. I didn't tell them what happened. I just needed to get away from there. It's been almost a year now. I've never gone back to that pond. I haven't told anyone this story until now. Sometimes I try to convince myself that I imagined it all, that the stress of the divorce and the city and everything just made me hallucinate. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The worst part? Sometimes late at night in my apartment in the city, I swear I can hear footsteps outside my door. And I imagine him standing there with those unblinking eyes, waiting. I can't prove any of this happened. The police report probably just says, "Nervous city dweller hears raccoon." But I know what I experienced. I don't fish anymore. I don't like the water. I don't like the woods. And I never want to see another red baseball cap as long as I live. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last summer on Lake Wildermere. It's been almost a year, and I've barely told anyone except my wife about it. I figured it was time to write it down somewhere, maybe to make sense of it myself, or maybe just to warn others. My brother-in-law, Carson, had just bought this beautiful 26-foot cabin cruiser. He'd been saving for years, always talking about how we'd go fishing on it once he finally got it. Carson's one of those genuinely good guys, always smiling, always ready to help anyone. When he finally got the boat, The first thing he did was invite me, Rick, and Mike for a 3-day fishing trip up at Lake Wildermere. Wildermere is about 4 hours north of where we live. It's this massive lake surrounded by dense forest with all these little islands and hidden coves. Not many people go there because it's pretty remote, but the fishing is incredible. Carson had researched all the best spots, and we'd been planning this trip for months. We arrived at the lake early Thursday morning. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. We loaded up the boat with our gear, coolers full of beer and food, and launched from the only public dock on the southern shore. The plan was to head to the northern part of the lake, where there are fewer people and more fish. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. We caught a bunch of walleye and northern pike, drank beer, told stupid jokes, and just enjoyed being away from work, phones, and responsibilities. By late afternoon, Carson navigated us into this secluded cove surrounded by tall pines. It was the perfect spot to anchor for the night, sheltered from the wind with a small beach where we could build a fire later. After securing the boat about 20 yards offshore, we started cleaning our catch on the back deck. Mike and Rick were arguing about some football game while Carson was showing me how he'd upgraded the boat's navigation system. It was around 7 p.m., still plenty of daylight, but starting to get that golden evening glow. That's when I first noticed the skiff. It was maybe half a mile away, just a small dot moving slowly across the water toward us. I didn't think much of it at first. Other people fish on the lake after all. But as it got closer, something felt off. The boat was a beat-up aluminum skiff with an outboard motor that sounded like it was on its last legs. What struck me as weird was how slowly they were approaching, almost like they were deliberately taking their time. "Looks like we've got company," I said to Carson, nodding toward the approaching boat. Carson glanced up and waved. "Maybe they know where the big ones are hiding," he laughed. As the skiff got closer, I could see 2 men on board. They were both wearing dark clothes despite the warm weather. Jeans, long-sleeve shirts, and baseball caps pulled low over their faces. What really unsettled me was that neither of them was talking. They just sat there, staring straight ahead as their boat puttered toward us. When they got within about 30 feet, they cut the engine. The older one, probably in his 50s with a gray beard, finally spoke. "Evening," he said, but his voice was flat, emotionless. "We're having some trouble with our boat, run out of gas and food, been out longer than we expected." His companion, a younger guy, maybe in his 30s, just stared at us without blinking. He had this blank expression that made the hair on my arm stand up. Neither of them smiled or showed any kind of normal human emotion. Mike and Rick had stopped talking and were watching the exchange. I could feel the tension in the air. Something wasn't right about these guys. Carson, being Carson, immediately offered to help. "We've got plenty of gas and food to spare. How much do you need?" "Couple gallons should do it," the older man replied in that same monotone voice, "and whatever food you can spare." Carson grabbed a gas can and started to pour some into a smaller container to give them. While he was doing that, I noticed the younger guy scanning our boat, his eyes lingering on our fishing gear, the cabin door, the coolers. It felt like he was taking inventory. "Where are you boys from?" Rick asked, trying to make conversation. Neither of them answered for a moment. Then the older one said, "Around." Just that one word, nothing else. I tried next. "Catch anything good today?" Again that weird pause. "No." The younger one finally spoke, his voice just as flat as his companion's. Carson returned with a container of gas and a plastic bag with some sandwiches and chips we'd packed. He handed them over to the older man, who took them without a word of thanks. "That should get you going," Carson said. "The North Marina isn't too far if you head straight that way." He pointed north. The older man nodded. "Much obliged." There was something unsettling about how he said it, like he was reading from a script or something. They started their motor and began to pull away. But then the younger one turned back and stared directly at me. His eyes were empty, like looking at a doll's eyes. "Nice boat," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It felt like a threat. We watched them putter away until they disappeared around a bend in the shoreline. Once they were gone, Mike let out a whistle. "Well, that was freaking weird," he said. "Yeah, not very friendly," Carson agreed, but he didn't seem as bothered as the rest of us. Rick was more direct. "I don't like the looks of those guys. Something's not right about them." I nodded. "Yeah, did you notice how they barely spoke? And the way they were looking at everything?" Carson shrugged. "Some people are just awkward. Maybe they're embarrassed about needing help." We tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and get back to enjoying our evening. We built a fire on the small beach, grilled some of the fish we'd caught, and drank more beer than we probably should have. By the time we turned in around 11 p.m., I'd almost forgotten about the strange encounter. The boat had 2 small sleeping cabins. Carson and I took one, Mike and Rick the other. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but something woke me around midnight. At first, I thought it was just Rick snoring in the next cabin, but then I realized it was the faint sound of an outboard motor in the distance. I lay there in the dark, listening as the sound grew louder, then suddenly cut off. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I nudged Carson, but he just grunted and rolled over. The boat gently rocked in the water, and outside I could hear the soft lapping of waves against the hull. I was debating whether to get up and check things out when I heard footsteps on the deck. Soft, deliberate footsteps, like someone trying not to make noise. My whole body went cold. I was about to wake Carson when a terrified scream ripped through the night. It was Mike. His scream cut off abruptly, like someone had put a hand over his mouth. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Carson was already scrambling out of his bunk. "What the hell?" he whispered. Before I could answer, we heard Mike's voice, shaking with fear. "There's someone on the boat! There's someone on the fucking boat!" We burst out of our cabin into the main area. Rick was fumbling with a flashlight, his face pale in the beam. Mike was pressed against the wall, pointing toward the deck. "I woke up and they were standing over me," he gasped. "Just staring at me. Those same fucking guys from earlier." Carson grabbed the biggest flashlight and wrenched open the cabin door. We all followed him onto the deck, hearts racing. The night was eerily silent, except for our heavy breathing and the gentle lapping of water against the hull. Carson swept the flashlight across the water. At first, I didn't see anything. Then the beam caught something at the water's edge on the beach, where we'd had our fire earlier. 2 figures standing perfectly still, watching us. The light reflected off their eyes like animals caught in headlights. "Hey!" Carson yelled. "What the hell are you doing?" The figures didn't move or respond. They just stood there, side by side, staring at us. Then, slowly, deliberately, they turned and walked back into the trees. A few moments later, we heard the outboard motor start up. Carson jumped off the boat and waded to shore, flashlight in hand. The rest of us followed, stumbling through the shallow water. By the time we reached the beach, the skiff was already moving away, a dark shape against the water. The moon had risen, and in its pale light, I could just make out the 2 men sitting rigidly in their boat, still looking back at us as they disappeared into the darkness. We stood there, soaking wet and shivering despite the warm night, until the sound of their motor faded completely. "What the actual fuck?" Rick whispered. Back on the boat, we did a thorough check of everything. Carson's wallet was gone from where he'd left it on the counter. So were his keys and phone. We discovered they'd siphoned about half of our gas from the tank. Thankfully, they hadn't taken our emergency radio or the spare keys Carson kept hidden. None of us went back to sleep that night. We sat in the main cabin with all the lights on, a loaded fishing knife within reach of each of us. We talked about calling the police on the radio, but we figured by the time anyone reached us, those men would be long gone. At first light, we pulled up anchor and headed straight for the marina. The whole way back, I kept scanning the shoreline, half expecting to see that beat-up skiff waiting for us. At the marina, we reported the theft to the local sheriff, who took our statements but didn't seem particularly concerned. "Probably just some locals looking for easy pickings," he said. "We get reports of boat thefts now and then. You boys are lucky they only took your wallet and some gas." But I didn't feel lucky. I felt like we'd escaped something much worse. We cut our trip short and headed home that day. Carson tried to laugh it off, saying at least he had a story to tell when breaking in his new boat. But the rest of us couldn't shake what had happened. It wasn't just that they'd robbed us. It was everything about them, the way they moved, the way they spoke, the way they looked at us with those dead eyes. In the months since, I've thought a lot about that night on Lake Wildermere. Sometimes I almost convince myself we overreacted, that they were just ordinary thieves who saw an opportunity and took it. But then I remember waking up to Mike's scream and seeing those two figures standing at the shoreline, watching us with that unnatural stillness. And I think about what might have happened if Mike hadn't woken up when he did, if we'd all kept sleeping while those men moved through our boat. I've tried researching if there have been other incidents on Lake Wildermere, found a few vague reports of boats being broken into, but nothing specific about two men in a skiff. Carson wants to go back this summer, says lightning doesn't strike twice, but there's no way in hell I'm going back to that lake. Something tells me those men are still out there, drifting silently across the dark water, looking for the next boat to approach with their dead eyes and empty voices. I don't know what they really wanted from us that night, but I'm pretty sure it was more than just Carson's wallet and some gas. I didn't sleep last night. Again. That damn face keeps coming back every time I close my eyes. It's been 3 months since our trip to that lake, and I still can't shake what happened. I've tried talking to friends about it, but they just look at me like I'm crazy or making it up. So I thought maybe writing it down might help, even if no one believes me. My grandfather passed away last week. He was 84. The doctors said it was natural causes, but I know better. Whatever we saw in that lake, it took a piece of him that day. It took pieces of both of us. For some background, my grandpa was the one who taught me to fish when I was just a kid. Every summer since I was about 7, we'd go out to different spots around Blackwater County. He knew every creek, pond, and fishing hole within 50 miles. By the time I hit my 20s, I thought we'd covered them all. That changed 3 months ago. It was early May, and I'd driven up from the city to spend the weekend with him, like I often did. He'd been more withdrawn lately, spending more time alone and talking less. My mom said it was just old age, but I could tell something was weighing on him. That Saturday morning, I woke up to find him already dressed in his fishing gear, which was unusual. Normally, I was the one dragging him out of bed at the crack of dawn. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee mug. "Morning, Grandpa," I said, pouring myself some coffee. He looked up at me with this strange expression. I want to take you somewhere today, somewhere I haven't been in a long time. Something in his voice made me uneasy, but I nodded. Sure, where are we headed? Miller's Lake, he said, almost whispering the name. I frowned. Never heard of it. No one really goes there anymore. Trail's probably grown over by now. I didn't think much of it then. Just figured it was some forgotten spot that had gotten harder to access over the years. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the way his hands trembled as he packed our gear. We drove about an hour north, deeper into the county than we usually went. The roads got narrower, turning from asphalt to gravel, then to dirt. Finally, Grandpa pulled over beside what looked like a solid wall of trees and brush. "This is it," he said, turning off the engine. I looked around, confused. "Where's the trail?" "Used to be right here." He pointed to a barely visible break in the underbrush. "We'll have to push through." It took us nearly 40 minutes to navigate what should have been a 10-minute walk. The path was completely overgrown with thorny bushes and fallen branches. Several times I suggested turning back, but Grandpa was oddly determined, hacking away at the vegetation with a small machete he'd brought along. "Must be really good fishing if it's worth all this trouble," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. He didn't laugh, just kept moving forward with this intense focus I'd never seen before. When we finally broke through the trees, I saw it, Miller's Lake. It wasn't very big, maybe a quarter-mile across, surrounded by dense forest on all sides, but something about it immediately felt wrong. The water was unnaturally still, almost like glass. It wasn't blue or green like most lakes around here. It was black, not murky or muddy, but deeply, intensely black, like looking into an endless void. Yet it was perfectly reflective, mirroring the trees and sky above it with crystal clarity. But the thing that really got to me was the silence, complete, absolute silence. No birds calling, no insects buzzing, no fish jumping, not even the sound of wind through the trees. It was like the entire area was holding its breath. "Grandpa, what is this place?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. He stared at the water for a long moment before answering. "Just an old fishing spot. Not many people know about it." I could tell he was lying. His voice had that forced casual tone people use when they're trying to hide something. We unloaded the small aluminum rowboat from the truck's bed and dragged it to the shoreline. The mud around the lake's edge was black and thick, sucking at our boots with each step. It smelled wrong, too. Not like the usual lakeside mud, but almost metallic, like old pennies. As we pushed the boat into the water, I noticed how it barely made a ripple. The surface just seemed to accept the intrusion, then immediately return to its mirror-like state. No waves, no disturbance. Grandpa insisted on rowing us out to the middle, even though his arthritis usually made this difficult. He moved with a strange urgency, his eyes constantly scanning the water around us. I tried to make conversation, but his answers were short and distracted. When we reached roughly the center of the lake, he shipped the oars and just sat there staring down into the black water. I figured we were finally going to start fishing, so I reached for my rod. "Not yet," he said sharply, still fixed on the water. "Just wait." So I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. The silence was crushing. No sound except our breathing and the occasional creak of the boat. I was about to ask what exactly we were waiting for when Grandpa suddenly tensed up. "It's still here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. A chill ran down my spine. "What's still here?" He didn't answer, just kept staring at a spot in the water about 10 feet from our boat. I followed his gaze, trying to see what had captured his attention. At first, I saw nothing, just the black, reflective surface. Then slowly, I began to make out something pale beneath the water. It was maybe 6 feet down, a lighter shape against the darkness. As I squinted, trying to figure out what I was looking at, it moved slightly, rotating upward. That's when I saw it. A face. A human face, just under the surface, looking up at us. My breath caught in my throat. The face was pale, not the blue-white of a drowned body, but a sickly, unnatural pallor that seemed to glow slightly against the black water. Its features were human, but wrong somehow. The proportions were slightly off, the eyes too large, too far apart, and those eyes, completely black, without iris or white, like two holes punched into the face. They stared directly at us, unblinking. I gripped the side of the boat so hard my knuckles went white. "Grandpa," I managed to choke out, "there's someone in the water." "I know," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I've seen it before." As we watched frozen, the face smiled, a terrible, too-wide smile that seemed to split the lower half of its face. Then it began to sink, slowly descending into the darkness until it disappeared completely. The moment it vanished, Grandpa exploded into action. "We need to leave. Now." He grabbed the oars and began rowing frantically toward shore, his earlier arthritis seemingly forgotten in his panic. "What the fuck was that?" I shouted, still staring at the spot where the face had been. "Shouldn't we, I don't know, try to help them? Call someone?" "That's not a person," Grandpa said, rowing harder. "Not anymore." The trip back to shore felt like it took forever. The boat seemed to move unnaturally slowly through the water, as if something was holding us back. I kept scanning the surface, terrified of seeing that face again, perhaps closer this time. At one point, I thought I saw movement under us, a pale shape passing beneath the boat, but it was gone before I could be sure. When we finally reached the shore, we practically jumped out, dragging the boat roughly onto land. Without a word, Grandpa began gathering our things, shoving equipment haphazardly into bags. "Grandpa, stop," I said, grabbing his arm. "You need to tell me what's going on. What was that in the water?" He looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "I should never have brought you here," he said. I thought maybe it would be gone after all these years. I needed to know for sure." "Know what? What is this place?" He sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 84 years. "This lake is cursed, has been for as long as anyone can remember. The old-timers used to warn kids to stay away, but no one really believed the stories." "What stories?" "That something lives in the water, something that watches, waits." He looked back at the lake. "Back in 1967, I came fishing here with a friend. We saw what you just saw, that face under the water. We got out of there fast, thought we were just seeing things. 3 days later, a 12-year-old boy went missing. Tommy Wilkins. They found his fishing pole on the shore but never found him. I felt sick. You think whatever's in the water took him? I know it did, because I came back a week after he disappeared, wanted to see for myself, and I saw that face again, but different. It looked like Tommy, but wrong, like something was wearing Tommy's face as a mask. A cold sweat broke out across my back. "That's insane," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew what I'd seen was real. After that, I never came back. Told everyone I knew to stay away. Over time, people forgot about this place. The trail grew over, but I never forgot. He looked me in the eyes. "I'm dying, son. Cancer. Doctors gave me a few months. I needed to know if it was still here before I go. Needed to know if I should take the secret with me or warn the next generation." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. "Cancer? Why didn't you tell me?" "Didn't want to worry you, but now you know everything about me and about this place." He gripped my shoulders. Promise me you'll never come back here, and don't tell anyone else about it either. The curious ones will want to see for themselves, and that thing, it gets hungry. We made it back to the truck in record time, despite the overgrown trail. Neither of us spoke much on the drive home. What was there to say? I'd seen something impossible, something that shouldn't exist in a rational world. That night, Grandpa made me swear again never to return to Miller's Lake. I promised. It wasn't a hard promise to keep. Wild horses couldn't drag me back there. 3 weeks later, Grandpa took a turn for the worse. The cancer had spread faster than the doctors expected. During his final days, he would sometimes wake up in a panic, claiming he could see the face watching him from corners of the room. When he died last week, I was at his bedside. His last words to me were, "It knows me now, it knows you too." I've tried to convince myself that what we saw was just a reflection, or maybe a large fish, or even a hallucination brought on by stress and the knowledge of Grandpa's illness. But deep down, I know better. Sometimes when I'm washing my face, I'll catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror, and for a split second, I'll see that face from the lake superimposed over my own, pale, wrong, with those terrible black eyes. And for that moment, I feel something cold and ancient looking out through my eyes, watching me from somewhere far away. I don't know what lives in Miller's Lake. I don't know if it's actually taken people or if my grandfather's guilt over a boy's accidental drowning created a lifetime of fear and superstition. But I do know this. Some places in this world feel wrong. They feel like thin spots, where whatever membrane separates our reality from something else has worn down to transparency. Miller's Lake is such a place, and whatever watches from beneath those black waters is still there, waiting patiently for someone else to come fishing. I've kept my promise to Grandpa. I haven't been back, and I haven't told anyone where the lake is. Until now, I haven't even written down what happened. But sometimes I wonder if that thing in the lake could find my grandfather, even as he lay dying miles away. Does it really matter if I stay away? Does it matter if I keep it secret? Because ever since that day, I can't shake the feeling that something followed us home. Something that watches me when I'm alone. Something that waits. And the water from my faucet has started to run black. It's been 2 months since I lost my dad, and I still can't bring myself to tell anyone the whole truth about what I saw that night at the lake. The police report says accidental drowning. My mom and sister think I'm traumatized and imagining things, and my friends just awkwardly change the subject whenever I bring it up. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that whatever took my dad is still out there. Dad and I had been fishing together since I was old enough to hold a rod. It was our thing, you know? Every other weekend, we'd pack up the truck and head out to one of the dozens of lakes scattered throughout the state. We had our favorites, Crystal Point for the summer base runs, Hemlock Creek when the trout were biting in spring. But Loch Morgan Lake was always Dad's special place. He'd discovered it years before I was born, back when he was doing survey work for the forestry department. It was way out there, a good 30 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a dirt road that turned into a glorified trail for the last 5 miles. Dad always said that's what made it perfect. No weekend warriors out there, he'd say with a wink. Just serious fishermen and the fish. The last time I saw my dad alive was a Friday morning, 2 months ago. I'd crashed at my parents' place the night before, something I rarely did now that I had my own apartment in the city. But my car was in the shop, and I'd needed a ride to work, so it just made sense. I was having coffee with Mom when Dad came into the kitchen, already dressed in his fishing gear. This wasn't unusual. Dad had been semi-retired for a couple years and often took solo trips when I couldn't get away from work. "Heading out?" I asked, expecting the usual response about checking out Sawmill Run or maybe Crooked Creek. "Loch Morgan," he said, pouring himself a travel mug of coffee. "Haven't been out there in a while." Something about his tone caught my attention. There was an urgency to it that seemed odd. "Want me to call in sick and come with?" I offered, half joking. Dad shook his head. No. Just a quick overnight. Back Sunday evening at the latest." He hesitated, then added, "I just need to check on something." Mom rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Your father and his secret fishing spots. Always worried someone's going to steal his favorite hole." Dad laughed, but it sounded forced. He gave Mom a kiss on the cheek, clapped me on the shoulder, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at me. "Hey," he said, "remember that old story I used to tell you? About the fish that couldn't be caught?" I nodded, recalling the silly campfire tale he'd spin when I was a kid, about a massive fish that had lived for hundreds of years, growing wise enough to avoid all lures and hooks. "Just a story," he said with a strange smile. "Just a story." And then he was gone. That was the last time I saw him. When Sunday evening came and went with no word from Dad, Mom started to worry. By Monday morning, she was frantic. Dad always called if he was running late. Always. I told her I'd drive out to Loch Morgan to check on him. "He probably got a flat tire on that awful road," Mom said, trying to convince herself. "His phone never gets service out there anyway." The drive out to Loch Morgan took nearly 3 hours. The last time I'd been there was maybe 2 years ago, but the route was etched in my memory from countless trips throughout my childhood and early adulthood. As the roads got narrower and rougher, that familiar mix of excitement and peace that always came with our fishing trips was replaced by a growing sense of dread. When I finally reached the small clearing that served as the lake's makeshift parking area, I spotted Dad's truck immediately. It was parked neatly, locked up tight, with no sign of damage or trouble. His trailer was there too, but the boat was gone, presumably on the water. I felt a momentary wave of relief. He must have lost track of time, or maybe decided to stay an extra day for the fishing. I hiked the quarter-mile trail down to the lake shore. Loch Morgan isn't large as lakes go, maybe 3/4 of a mile across at its widest point, but it's deep and surrounded by dense forest that rises steeply from the shoreline. There's only one decent spot to put in a boat, and that's where the trail ends. As I emerged from the trees, I immediately spotted Dad's aluminum fishing boat. It was anchored about 100 yards out, smack in the middle of the lake, exactly where his favorite fishing hole was. But something was wrong. The boat was floating empty. I cupped my hands around my mouth and shouted, "Dad! Hey, Dad!" My voice echoed across the water and faded into silence. No response. I scanned the shoreline in both directions, hoping to see him relieving himself in the bushes or maybe collecting firewood. Nothing. Just the still, dark water and the silent trees. The boat rental shack that used to operate at Loch Morgan had closed years ago, so there was no easy way for me to get out to Dad's boat. I considered swimming, but the water was cold, and the boat was far enough out that it would be a difficult swim even in ideal conditions. I paced the shoreline, frustration and worry building. That's when I spotted an old, weathered rowboat pulled up on the shore about 50 yards down from the main put-in. It looked abandoned, half hidden in the reeds, but it seemed intact enough to float. I didn't hesitate. I dragged it to the water, found a broken branch that would serve as a makeshift paddle, and pushed off. The rowboat took on some water but remained afloat as I awkwardly made my way toward Dad's boat. As I got closer, I could see more details, and each one made my stomach knot tighter. His tackle box was open on the bench seat. His favorite rod was still in its holder at the stern. There was even a half-eaten sandwich on a paper plate, as if he'd been interrupted in the middle of lunch. When I finally reached the boat and climbed aboard, everything looked normal, except for the absence of my father. His life vest wasn't there, which initially gave me hope. Maybe he'd fallen in but managed to swim to shore somewhere else around the lake. I pulled up the anchor and used the boat's trolling motor to make a slow circuit of the entire shoreline, calling for him constantly. Nothing. The lake was eerily quiet. No birds, no signs of fish jumping, not even the usual wind in the trees. Just silence and still water that looked increasingly black and bottomless as the afternoon wore on. I called 911 once I was back in cell range. The local sheriff's department sent out a search and rescue team, then divers. They searched for 3 days. They found nothing. No body, no life vest, no signs of struggle, no clues at all. Just an empty boat with a half-eaten lunch. The official report eventually ruled it as an accidental drowning, body not recovered. The theory was that Dad somehow fell overboard, and his body was trapped somewhere in the depths of the lake. Loch Morgan is notoriously deep, over 200 feet in some places, with underwater caves and crevices formed by the same ancient volcanic activity that created the surrounding mountains. Mom was devastated. My sister flew in from Seattle. We held a memorial service with an empty casket. Life went on, as it somehow always does. But then the dreams started. At first they were just fragments, images of dark water, the sound of something moving beneath the surface. But within weeks, they developed into something more coherent and infinitely more terrifying. In these dreams, I'd be standing on the shore of Loch Morgan at night, and I'd hear Dad's voice coming from somewhere beneath the water. "Help me," he'd call. "I'm still here. I'm trapped down here." The dreams were so vivid that I'd wake up gasping, convinced they were real. I started sleeping with the lights on, then barely sleeping at all. I lost weight. My performance at work suffered. Friends noticed but didn't know what to say beyond the usual platitudes about grief and time healing all wounds. I tried talking to Mom about it once, but the pain in her eyes when I mentioned Dad was too much to bear. My sister suggested therapy. My best friend gently recommended grief counseling. No one, not a single person, entertained the possibility that these weren't just dreams, that Dad might actually be trying to reach me. 6 weeks after Dad disappeared, I found myself driving back to Loch Morgan Lake alone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just felt pulled there, like a fish on a line, unable to resist the tug. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The lake looked the same as always, peaceful, pristine, ringed by dense forest and reflected mountains. But now I knew better. Now I could feel the wrongness of the place, like a physical pressure against my skin. I hiked down to the shore and sat on a fallen log, watching as the sun began to set behind the mountains. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to be there, to see the place again in person, to confirm to myself that it was just an ordinary lake, and that my dreams were just manifestations of grief. As darkness fell, the air grew cold. I should have left, should have hiked back to my car before it became too dark to navigate the trail. But I couldn't move. It was as if the lake itself was holding me there, waiting for something. And then I heard it, a voice, Dad's voice, calling from out on the water. "Help me!" It was faint but unmistakable. My heart lurched in my chest. I jumped to my feet, scanning the darkened surface of the lake. There, in the middle, where Dad's boat had been anchored, a faint light was moving. As I watched, paralyzed, the light grew brighter, and I could make out what looked like a boat drifting toward shore, toward me. I should have run. Everything in me screamed to get away. But it was Dad's voice, and I couldn't abandon him again. As the boat drifted closer, the light within it grew brighter until I could make out a figure standing in it. It looked like Dad, but wrong somehow. He was wearing the same clothes he'd had on the day he disappeared, but they were soaking wet and seemed to be moving strangely, as if underwater, despite the boat being above the surface. His face was pale, too pale, and his eyes. God, his eyes were just empty, hollow spots where eyes should be. "Help me," the thing that looked like my father said again. "I'm trapped down here with it." The boat continued to drift toward shore, now only about 20 yards out. I could see details I didn't want to see. The way Dad's skin seemed to ripple like the surface of the lake, the weeds tangled in his hair, the black water that seemed to pour continuously from his mouth as he spoke. "What happened to you?" I managed to choke out. "I found it," he said, water spilling from his lips. "The thing in the deep, the thing that's lived here forever. It's hungry, son, so hungry, and now I'm part of it." The boat touched the shore with a gentle scraping sound. The apparition of my father stood motionless, those terrible empty eye sockets fixed on me. "Come with me," he said, extending a hand that seemed too long, the fingers webbed with something dark that glistened in the moonlight. "Come see what I found." I broke. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, away from the trail, away from anything that would lead back to the shore. Branches whipped my face. Roots tried to trip me, but I kept running, driven by a primal terror that overrode all other concerns. I don't remember most of the journey back to my car. I have flashes, falling into a ravine, pulling myself up a steep slope, using exposed tree roots, the taste of blood in my mouth from where I'd bitten my tongue. When I finally reached my car, my clothes were torn, my hands and face scratched and bloody. I drove home in a fugue state, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, constantly checking the rear-view mirror for, I don't know what, something following me from the lake, something that had taken my father and wanted me too. I haven't gone back to Loch Morgan Lake. I won't. But that doesn't mean I've escaped. The dreams have gotten worse, more vivid, more frequent. Sometimes I wake to find my sheets soaking wet, as if I've been submerged. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in any standing water, puddles after rain, the bath before I drain it, even my morning coffee if I stare into it too long. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear Dad's voice calling from the bathroom sink or the kitchen tap. "Help me. I'm still here. I'm trapped down here with it." I've told no one the full story until now. They'd think I was crazy, traumatized by grief. Maybe I am, but I know what I saw that night at Loch Morgan. I know that something ancient and hungry lives in its depths, something that took my father and changed him, made him into a lure to catch me too. I've started researching the history of the lake. There are old stories from the indigenous people of the region about a devouring spirit that lived in a certain body of water, though they never named it specifically. There are more recent accounts, hikers gone missing, solo fishermen who never returned, even a forest ranger in the 1970s who radioed in about something moving under the water before his transmission cut off. Dad knew. That's why he went back alone that day. He'd found something or learned something and went to confirm it, and whatever it was took him. I don't know what to do now. I can't sleep. I can't look at water without panicking. And worst of all, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that whatever lives in Loch Morgan Lake knows me now, has my scent somehow. That distance won't protect me forever. I hear water running in my bathroom now, though I know I turned off all the taps. I hear my name being called in my father's voice, and sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I see a tall, wet figure standing in my hallway, water pooling at its feet, empty eye sockets staring at me. I haven't gone near Loch Morgan Lake in weeks, but I'm terrified that Loch Morgan Lake is finding its way to me. I still haven't slept properly since that night 3 weeks ago. I'm writing this down partly to get it out of my system and partly because I need someone to believe me. The police didn't take me seriously, and my friends think I'm overreacting. But I know what happened. That night started so normal, just a regular Friday hangout with my buddies from college at Mike's place. Nothing crazy, just some beers, pizza, and watching the game. I left around 11:30 p.m., earlier than usual because I had to help my sister move the next morning. The drive home from Mike's is about 45 minutes, mostly along Route 16, which cuts through a lot of empty land between towns. I wasn't drunk, had maybe 2 beers over 4 hours, but I was tired and not paying enough attention to my dashboard. About halfway home, my fuel light started blinking. Shit! I'd been meaning to fill up earlier that day, but completely forgot. The gauge showed I had maybe 10-15 miles left, and I knew there wasn't much between where I was and home. That's when I remembered that old 24-hour gas station on Route 16. It's this decrepit place that feels like it's been there since the 60s, sitting alone on a stretch of highway where there's nothing else for miles. Most people avoid it because it's run down and overpriced, but I didn't have many options. When I pulled off the highway, the place looked even worse than I remembered. The sign reading "Last Gas for 30 miles" was half lit, with just LATGSFO 30 MIES actually visible. The price board showed gas at almost $1 more per gallon than anywhere else, but beggars can't be choosers. The station itself was this small concrete building with a single light over the door. The only other illumination came from the flickering neon "Open 24 HRS" sign in the window and the dim lights over the pumps. As I pulled in, I noticed there were no other cars, not even one that might belong to whoever was working. I parked at pump number 3 and got out. The air felt unusually still and cold for early October. The only sound was the buzzing of those old fluorescent lights over the pumps. I remember checking my phone, 12:08 a.m. and only 1 bar of service. As I got out to pump gas, I immediately felt watched. You know that sensation when the hairs on your neck stand up? It was like that, but more intense. I looked around, thinking maybe there was a clerk watching through the window, but I couldn't see anyone inside the station. The place seemed completely deserted. I tried to shake off the feeling and focused on pumping gas. The pump was ancient, one of those old mechanical ones that clicks loudly with each gallon. Every click seemed to echo in that empty lot. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the darkness beyond the station where the woods started. There was nothing visible past the small circle of light from the station, just pitch black. When the pump finally clicked off, I almost jumped. 46.72 for just under 12 gallons. Highway robbery. But I was just glad to have a full tank. I replaced the nozzle and was screwing my gas cap back on when I noticed something stuck under my windshield wiper. It was a small piece of paper, folded once. My first thought was that it must be some kind of advertisement or receipt that had blown onto my car, but it was a still night with no wind. I grabbed it and unfolded it. It was a handwritten note on what looked like the corner torn from a notebook. 3 words in messy black ink. "I'm here." I froze. My brain immediately tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone put it there earlier in the day while my car was in the parking lot at work. But I'd driven straight from work to Mike's, and I definitely would have noticed it when I left his place. Maybe it was meant for someone else? But mine was the only car at the station. I looked around frantically, suddenly very aware of how isolated I was. The gas station building windows revealed nothing but darkness inside. The road was empty in both directions. The woods surrounding the station seemed to absorb what little light there was. I jumped back in my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I was about to pull away, I glanced at the station building again and swear I saw movement inside. Just a shadow passing behind the grimy window. I hit the gas harder than I meant to, tires squealing as I pulled back onto Route 16. For the next 20 minutes of driving, I kept checking my rearview mirror. The road behind me stayed empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. My hands were sweating so much the steering wheel felt slick. I turned on the radio just to have some noise in the car, but even with the music playing, I kept thinking I heard something else, like breathing or rustling coming from the back seat. I checked multiple times, but there was nothing there. About 10 miles from my house, I noticed a car pulled over on the shoulder of the road ahead. Its headlights were off, but as I got closer, I could see it was an older model sedan, dark-colored, blue or black, hard to tell in the darkness. I slowed down slightly as I passed it, and that's when I saw there was someone sitting in the driver's seat. Just a silhouette, completely still, facing forward. Not moving to check a phone or look at a map, just sitting there in the dark. As I passed, I sped up again, now going well over the speed limit. My chest felt tight, and I was breathing so fast I was getting lightheaded. I kept checking my mirrors, terrified I would see headlights appear behind me, but the road stayed empty. The relief I felt when I finally turned onto my street was overwhelming. I live in a small house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but normally it feels safe. That night the streets were empty, most houses dark except for porch lights. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute, trying to calm down. I convinced myself I was overreacting. The note was probably some stupid prank or mistake. The car on the side of the road was just someone having car trouble or taking a break from driving. Nothing to freak out about. I grabbed my phone and keys and got out of the car. I was halfway to my front door when something made me turn back and look at my windshield. There, under the wiper on the driver's side, exactly where the first note had been, was another folded piece of paper. My stomach dropped. I felt like I was going to throw up. I slowly walked back to the car and took the note with trembling fingers. Same torn notebook paper, same messy handwriting. "I told you, I'm here." I ran to my front door, fumbling with my keys so badly I dropped them twice before managing to get inside. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, then ran through the house, turning on every light. I checked all the windows and the back door to make sure they were locked, then grabbed my baseball bat from the closet and called 911. The dispatcher tried to keep me calm while I explained what happened. She kept asking if I'd seen anyone directly threatening me, or if I had any idea who might be doing this. I didn't. She said officers would be there soon, but it might take a while since there was an accident on the highway they were dealing with. While waiting, I stayed in my living room, away from the windows, but where I could see my front yard and driveway. That's when I saw headlights slowly approaching my house. The car, the same dark sedan I'd seen on the side of the road, cruised past my house, then stopped about 50 feet past my driveway. I called 911 again, telling them the person was outside my house now. The dispatcher said officers were on their way. I was terrified to look, but couldn't stop myself from peeking through the blinds. The car just sat there, engine running, headlights now off. I could see the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat, just like before. For what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, nothing happened. Then, the driver's side door opened slowly. I couldn't make out any details about the person who got out. They were wearing dark clothes, maybe a hoodie. They just stood beside the car for a moment, then slowly started walking toward my house. I backed away from the window, gripping my bat so hard my knuckles were white. I remembered my phone was still connected to 911, and I frantically told the dispatcher someone was approaching my house. She said officers were 2 minutes out and told me to stay inside, away from doors and windows. Then I heard it, soft knocking on my front door. Not pounding or frantic, just gentle, almost polite tapping. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more knocks. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocking stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then came a new sound, scratching. It started at the front door, then moved to the living room window. Slow, deliberate scratching, like someone dragging their nails across the glass. I was frozen in place, bat raised, when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Police sirens in the distance getting closer. Through the window, I saw the blue and red lights reflecting off the houses down the street. I looked back toward where the dark sedan had been parked, and it was gone. No sign of the person either. When the police arrived, I was shaking so badly I could barely speak. 2 officers searched my yard and the surrounding streets but found nothing. No car, no person, not even footprints in the soft dirt of my front garden where someone would have had to stand to reach the window. The only evidence I had were the 2 notes, which the officers bagged as evidence, though I could tell they weren't taking it very seriously. Probably just some kids messing around, one officer said. We'll keep an eye on the neighborhood tonight, but I wouldn't worry too much. But I was worried. I am worried. Because even after the police left, after I'd triple-checked every lock, after I'd pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door and tried to sleep with the lights on and the bat beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever left those notes wasn't done with me. It's been 3 weeks now. I've installed security cameras, changed my routine, even stayed with my sister for a few days. The police say there have been no similar reports in the area. My friends think I'm being paranoid when I insist on meeting at their places instead of having them over or going out. But sometimes, when I'm driving home late, I see a dark sedan in my rearview mirror. It never follows me all the way home, never gets close enough for me to see the driver or the license plate. Just appears for a while, then turns off or falls back. And twice now I've come home to find my security cameras moved slightly, pointing in different directions than how I set them up. Nothing on the footage except static for a few seconds before they start recording normally again. The police say there's nothing they can do without more evidence. I've stopped calling them because I can tell they think I'm imagining things or exaggerating. Maybe I am. Maybe the gas station attendant was playing a sick joke. Maybe it's all coincidence. But I know what I saw that night. I know what I felt. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed trying to fall asleep, I swear I can hear that soft knocking again, followed by the sound of fingernails slowly dragging across my bedroom window. And I'm on the 2nd floor. I've been debating whether to even share this experience for months. My hands are still shaking as I type this, but I need to get it out there. Maybe someone can make sense of what happened to me. I started working the night shift at a gas station about 8 months ago. It's one of those small places just off the highway, not part of any major chain. The kind with flickering fluorescent lights and those old-style coolers that hum constantly. I took the job because I needed the money for school, and honestly, I liked the quiet. From midnight to 8 a.m., I'd maybe get 15-20 customers total. Most nights I could study or listen to podcasts and just ring people up when they came in for coffee or cigarettes. The owner was hardly ever there, and my manager only showed up during the day shift handover. The security was practically non-existent. Just one crappy camera behind the register that probably hasn't been updated since the 90s. The footage was so grainy you could barely make out faces. For the first few months, everything was normal. Truckers, insomniacs, the occasional drunk person looking for late-night snacks, nothing exciting, which was exactly what I wanted. Then last month, on a Tuesday night, I remember it was Tuesday because I'd just restocked the magazines and newspapers that come in on Tuesdays. This guy walked in around 2:30 a.m. From the moment he stepped through the door, something felt off. He was tall, probably 6'4", and rail-thin. His clothes looked normal enough, jeans, a dark jacket, but they hung on him like they were a size too big. His hair was this dirty brown color, all matted and sticking out in weird places like he hadn't washed it in weeks. But it was his face that really got to me. His skin was so pale it was almost gray, with dark circles under his eyes that made them look sunken in. And those eyes, they were wide open, like unnaturally wide, as if someone was holding his eyelids apart. I didn't see him blink once the entire time he was in the store. I gave my usual welcome to Gas and Go greeting, and he didn't even look at me. Most people at least nod or something, but this guy just walked straight to the back where we keep the refrigerated drinks, and then he just stood there, not scanning the selection or reaching for anything, just standing completely still, staring at the coolers. At first I thought maybe he was drunk or high. We get that sometimes, people so out of it they forget what they're doing. So after about 5 minutes of him not moving, I walked over and asked if he needed help finding something. He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge I was there. It was like talking to a mannequin. I was standing right next to him, and he just kept staring ahead with those unblinking eyes. I could hear his breathing. It was shallow and weirdly rhythmic, almost like he was counting each breath. I went back to the counter, keeping an eye on him through the security mirror we have mounted in the corner. He stood there for another 10 minutes without moving. Then suddenly, he opened the cooler door, grabbed a bottle of water, and walked to the register. When he put the water on the counter, I noticed his hands were dirty. Not just work dirty, but caked with what looked like dried mud under his fingernails. They were trembling slightly as he reached into his pocket for money. "That'll be $1.89, I said, trying to sound normal. He didn't respond, just placed exactly $1.89 and change on the counter, not a penny more or less. Perfect change. He hadn't even looked at the price tag. I put the water in a bag and held it out to him, but he just took the bottle, leaving the bag behind. Never said a word, never blinked. Just stared at me with those wide, glassy eyes for a moment before turning and walking out. As soon as he left, I felt this wave of relief wash over me. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until my shoulders suddenly relaxed. I texted my roommate about the weird customer, trying to laugh it off, but I kept glancing at the door for the rest of my shift. The next night, Wednesday, I was stocking the candy aisle around 2:25 a.m. when I got this sudden chill. I looked up, and there he was again, walking through the door at exactly 2:30. Same clothes, same matted hair, same wide, unblinking eyes. He went straight to the coolers again and stood in the exact same spot as the night before, completely motionless. This time, I didn't approach him. I just watched from behind the counter, pretending to organize receipts. After exactly the same amount of time as the previous night, I timed it 15 minutes. He grabbed a bottle of water and came to the register. As he placed the money on the counter, I noticed his hands were shaking more than the night before. The dirt under his fingernails looked fresher, darker, and there was something else. A smell, like wet earth and something metallic. When I handed him his receipt, our fingers barely touched, and his skin was ice cold. Again, not a word, not a blink, just that empty stare before he left with his water. I called my manager as soon as my shift ended and told her about this guy. She just laughed and said, "Sounds like you've got yourself a regular. As long as he pays, who cares if he's a little weird?" But it wasn't just a little weird. Something about this man made my skin crawl. Thursday night came, and I was a nervous wreck. I considered calling in sick, but needed the hours. I kept watching the clock as it approached 2:30 a.m. At exactly 2:29, I saw him through the glass doors, standing in the parking lot, staring at the store. He stood there for a full minute before walking in at precisely 2:30. This time, though, he didn't go to the coolers. Instead, he started walking around the store in this bizarre pattern, moving down one aisle, turning, going halfway down another, then backtracking, never picking anything up, never looking at products, just walking in these perfect, deliberate circles. And every time he completed a circuit, he would look directly at me. Those unblinking eyes would lock onto mine for just a second before he continued his path. I tried busying myself with inventory, but I could feel him watching me. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even write properly. After about 20 minutes of this, he finally approached the counter, empty-handed this time. He just stood there, staring at me. Up close, I could see there was something wrong with his pupils. They were dilated so much that his eyes looked almost black. Then he spoke. His voice was raspy, like sandpaper, as if he hadn't used it in years. "I've been watching you." Just 5 words, but they hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face. "You need to leave or I'm calling the police," I managed to say, though my voice cracked. He tilted his head slightly, like a dog confused by a sound. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. I immediately locked the door behind him and called my manager, who again told me I was overreacting. "If he comes back and actually threatens you, then call the police," she said. I didn't see him Friday or Saturday night, and I started to think maybe he'd moved on. I was still on edge, jumping at every little noise, but as the hours passed without incident, I began to relax. Sunday night was quiet, too quiet. Around 1 a.m., the power flickered briefly. Not unusual for our location, especially with the stormy weather we'd been having. I was behind the counter, trying to focus on my textbook, when I got that familiar feeling of being watched. I looked up at our security mirror and froze. There he was, standing outside the glass doors, just staring in, not moving, not trying to enter, just standing there in the rain, water streaming down his face, those eyes fixed on me. I grabbed my phone and called 911 immediately. The dispatcher said they'd send someone right away, but we're in a rural area. Right away meant at least 15 minutes. Those were the longest 15 minutes of my life. He never tried to come in, never moved from that spot, just stood there, getting soaked, watching me. I kept backing away until I hit the wall behind the counter, never taking my eyes off him. When the police finally arrived, their headlights swept across the parking lot, and he was gone, just vanished. The officers searched the area but found nothing. They took my statement and told me they'd keep an eye on the place, but I could tell they thought I was just a nervous girl spooked by some harmless weirdo. I couldn't sleep that day after my shift. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those unblinking eyes staring at me. I called my manager and told her I couldn't come in that night. She was annoyed but agreed to cover for me. The next day, I went in to formally quit. I just couldn't do it anymore. As I was turning in my keys, my manager mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "By the way, that guy you were worried about, he came in last night asking for you. Wanted to know when you'd be back. I told him you quit." I filed a police report that day, but they said there wasn't much they could do without any crime being committed. They took a description, told me to stay vigilant, all the usual useless advice. I moved in with my sister in another town the next week, changed my phone number, dropped my social media accounts, started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. It's been almost 2 months now, and I haven't seen him since. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I can feel those eyes watching me. I've started sleeping with my lights on. I've put extra locks on my doors and windows. Last week I got a package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a bottle of water, the same brand from the gas station, and a small clump of dirt. I don't know who he is or what he wants. The police say there's nothing they can do unless he actually threatens me again. My family thinks I'm overreacting to some harmless, socially awkward guy, but they didn't see those eyes. They didn't hear that raspy voice say, "I've been watching you." They don't feel what I feel every time I walk to my car in a dark parking lot. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. All I know is that somewhere out there, he's still watching, and sooner or later, he'll do more than just watch. Still shaken even though it happened 3 months ago. I can't stop thinking about it, especially at night when I'm trying to sleep. I've never been the anxious type before, but now I jump at shadows, and I haven't taken a back road since it happened. I've tried telling a few friends, but they just say I overreacted to some homeless guy. Maybe writing it all down will help me process it. It was late October, around 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday. I was driving back from visiting my buddy Jeff, who lives about 3 hours away. We'd been hanging out, watching the game, having a few beers. I left later than I planned because we got caught up talking about old times. I decided to take the back roads home instead of the highway. It would take longer, but I've always preferred the scenic route when I'm not in a rush. There's something peaceful about those empty country roads at night, or at least there used to be. It had been raining earlier, and the roads were still wet, reflecting my headlights. The drive was uneventful for the first couple hours. I was just cruising along, listening to a podcast about true crime, ironically enough, when I noticed my gas gauge getting dangerously low. The little orange light had been on for about 20 minutes, and I was starting to get nervous. I hadn't seen any gas stations for miles, and my phone had terrible reception out there in the middle of nowhere. The GPS kept cutting in and out. I started calculating in my head how much further I could go before running out completely. That's when I finally spotted a sign for gas ahead. I remember feeling relieved when I pulled off the main road. The gas station appeared suddenly around a bend. This old, run-down place with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed loudly in the quiet night. The sign just said gas in faded red letters. no brand name or anything. Only two of the lights illuminating the place were working properly, creating these weird pockets of shadow around the property. There was only one other car there, this beat-up old sedan, maybe from the 90s, parked off to the side of the building. It was this faded grayish color with what looked like primer spots on the passenger door. The windshield was cracked across the entire length. I remember thinking it was strange the car wasn't parked near the pumps or the store entrance. I pulled up to the pump closest to the store. The place looked open. The lights were on inside, but I couldn't see anyone at the counter. I stepped out of my car and immediately felt uneasy. You know that feeling when you sense you're being watched? That prickly sensation on the back of your neck? That hit me hard. The gas pumps were ancient, the kind without card readers. I'd have to go inside to pay first. As I was looking toward the store entrance, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. There was someone standing at the corner of the building, partially hidden in the shadows where the light didn't reach. I pretended not to see him at first, but it was impossible to ignore the way he was just standing there, not moving, just watching me. He was tall, really tall, maybe 6'4" or 6'5", and wearing dirty jeans and a stained jacket that was too thin for the October chill. His hair was wild and unkempt, like he hadn't showered in weeks. I decided to quickly go inside, pay for my gas, and get out of there. As I started walking toward the store, the man stepped out of the shadows. The way he moved was just wrong. It was deliberate, almost mechanical. Each step perfectly measured. His eyes never left me. They were wide and intense, almost feverish. When I reached for the door, I glanced back and saw he had changed direction and was now walking straight toward me. My heart started racing. I yanked open the door and hurried inside. There was an older guy behind the counter reading a magazine. He barely looked up when I entered. The store was tiny, just a couple of aisles with snacks and basic supplies. The fluorescent lights buzzed loudly overhead, flickering every few seconds. "Pump number 2, please," I said, pulling out my wallet. The cashier nodded, took my cash, and pressed some buttons on his ancient register. I glanced out the window and saw the man was now standing by my car, looking it over. His hands were moving along the trunk, almost caressing it. "Hey, who's that guy out there?" I asked the cashier. He squinted through the window. "Never seen him before," he said with a shrug, then went back to his magazine. "Great, super helpful." I stood there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I needed the gas. I wouldn't make it home without it. But everything about this situation felt wrong. I took a deep breath and headed back outside. As soon as I stepped out, the man's head snapped up and those wild eyes locked onto mine. I tried to act normal, walking confidently to my car. I started pumping the gas, keeping my back to my vehicle, facing him. "Hey there," he called out. His voice was rough like sandpaper. "That's a nice car." I nodded and mumbled a quick thanks, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. He started walking toward me again, that same measured pace, step, 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 like he was counting each one in his head. "My car broke down," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the beat-up sedan. "Been stuck here for hours." I nodded again, watching the numbers on the gas pump slowly tick up. Never had I wanted a tank to fill faster. "I need a ride," he continued, now only about 15 feet away. "Just to the next town. Not far." "Sorry, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm heading the other direction." He tilted his head slightly, like a confused dog. The movement was unnatural, jerky. Then his face broke into this wide smile that never reached his eyes. "You don't know which way I'm going," he said softly. "So how do you know you're heading the other direction?" That's when the real fear hit me. He was right. I'd never asked which town he needed to get to. I felt my mouth go dry. "Look, I really can't help you out tonight," I said, turning back to the pump, trying to will it to go faster. He took 3 more steps toward me. Now he was maybe 10 feet away. I could smell him. This sour, unwashed odor mixed with something metallic. "You think I'm going to hurt you?" he asked, his voice dropping lower. "Is that it? You think I'm dangerous?" I didn't answer. The pump finally clicked off at 4378. I hung up the nozzle with shaking hands and screwed my gas cap back on. "I asked you a question," he said, taking another step closer. "Do you think I'm dangerous?" His right hand slid into his jacket pocket, and I saw something glint in the fluorescent light. Maybe a knife, maybe just my imagination. I didn't wait to find out. "Have a good night," I said, yanking my car door open. That's when he lunged forward, moving faster than I expected. His hand shot out and grabbed my car door. "I need a ride," he shouted, his face contorting with rage. Spittle flew from his mouth. His eyes were so wide I could see white all around the irises. I shoved myself into the driver's seat and pulled the door with all my strength. It slammed shut, barely missing his fingers. I hit the lock button just as his face appeared at my window. He pressed his palm flat against the glass, spreading his fingers wide. His face was inches from mine, separated only by the window. He was smiling again. But his eyes, God, his eyes. They were completely empty, lifeless, like looking into a void. "I just need a ride," he whispered, his breath fogging the glass between us. "Don't you want to help me? Don't you want to be a good person?" I jammed my key in the ignition, started the car, and threw it in reverse. He stayed right by my window, walking alongside as I backed up, his hand still pressed against the glass. He was saying something I couldn't hear over the engine. I shifted to drive and floored it. The tires squealed against the wet pavement as I peeled out of that gas station. In my rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the middle of the lot, watching me leave. He didn't chase after me. He didn't need to. The image of him was already seared into my brain. I drove like a maniac for the next 20 minutes, constantly checking my mirrors to see if anyone was following me. Every set of headlights made my heart race. I didn't slow down until I reached the highway, where there were other cars, and I felt somewhat safer. When I finally got home, I double-checked all my locks and windows before collapsing on my couch. I couldn't stop shaking. I kept seeing his face, those empty eyes, that smile that wasn't a smile at all. The next day, I convinced myself I had overreacted. Maybe he was just a homeless guy who really did need a ride. Maybe the late hour and my tiredness had made me paranoid. I decided to call the gas station to see if the man was still hanging around. Maybe I could send someone to help him if he really was stranded. The number for the gas station wasn't listed anywhere. I tried looking it up online, but nothing came up. I even checked Google Maps, thinking I could at least find the location again. But here's the thing that really freaks me out. I couldn't find it. That gas station doesn't seem to exist on any map. 2 weeks later, I was scrolling through local news when a headline caught my eye. Body found in abandoned vehicle on County Road 15. There was a picture of a beat-up gray sedan being towed away. The article said the body had been there for weeks, maybe months. I don't know if it was the same car from the gas station. I don't know if it was the same man who approached me that night. But I can't shake the feeling that something impossible happened to me on that back road. Now I take the highway everywhere I go. I don't drive at night if I can help it. And I never ever let my gas tank get below half empty. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone is watching me through my bedroom window. I can still see those eyes, that emptiness behind them. I don't know what would have happened if I'd given him a ride that night. I don't know who or what he really was. But I know one thing for certain. Something was very wrong with that man, that place, that entire situation. And I can't stop wondering if someday I'll turn around in a gas station and see him standing there again, watching me with those empty eyes. I still can't sleep with the windows open. It's been 4 months since our camping trip to Whispering Valley, and I jump at every twig snap outside my apartment. My roommate thinks I'm being dramatic, but he wasn't there. He didn't see what we saw. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. Midterms had just finished, and the 4 of us, me, Ethan, Avery, and Thomas, desperately needed a break from campus life. Thomas had heard about this remote spot in Whispering Valley from his cousin, who was into hardcore backpacking. The appeal was immediate. No cell reception, no other people, just us and nature for a few days. We left Friday afternoon, crammed into Ethan's old Honda Civic, with our gear stuffed in the trunk and back seat. The drive took about 3 hours, mostly on highways until the last 40 minutes, when we turned onto increasingly narrow roads. The final stretch wasn't even paved, just dirt and gravel that made Ethan wince every time his car bottomed out on a particularly deep rut. "If this destroys my suspension, you guys are chipping in," he kept saying, only half joking. The isolation hit me when we reached the unofficial parking area, just a wider section of the forest road with a small wooden sign reading "Trailhead." No other cars, no ranger station, nothing but trees and silence. I remember feeling a rush of excitement mixed with a tiny prickle of unease. It was exactly what we wanted, but standing there, surrounded by nothing but wilderness, I briefly wondered if we'd gone too far off the grid. The hike to our campsite was about 1.5 miles. We followed a narrow trail that didn't look particularly maintained, ducking under branches and stepping over fallen logs. Thomas led the way, consulting his cousin's hand-drawn map occasionally. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. Under different circumstances, I would have found it beautiful. The campsite itself was perfect, a small clearing near a rushing stream surrounded by tall pines and thick undergrowth. There was even a crude fire ring made of stones, evidence that others had camped there before, which I found strangely comforting. "Dude, this is sick," Avery said, dropping his pack and spinning around to take in the view. No one around for miles. We set up our tents, Ethan and Thomas sharing one, Avery and I in the other, and gathered firewood. By the time dusk settled over the forest, we had a decent blaze going. We sat around it, cooking hot dogs on sticks and passing around a flask of whiskey Thomas had smuggled in his pack. The stream's constant babble mixed with the crackling fire created this peaceful background noise that made all the stress of college seem 1,000,000 miles away. It wasn't until after we'd finished eating and were just sitting there, sharing stories and laughing, that I noticed the feeling. It started as a slight pressure at the base of my skull, like when you know someone's staring at you. I tried to shake it off, but it persisted, growing stronger until I couldn't focus on the conversation anymore. I was just about to mention it when Avery suddenly went quiet mid-sentence. His eyes fixed on something behind me, across the clearing. The change in his expression made my skin crawl before I even turned around. "Guys," he said softly, "someone's there." We all whipped around to look where he was pointing. At first I didn't see anything but shadows and trees. Then a figure stepped forward, just to the edge of our firelight, and my blood went cold. He was tall, unnaturally so, and thin, with limbs that seemed too long for his body. His clothes were dirty and worn, hanging off him like they belonged to someone else. But it was his face that made my heart stop. Gaunt, with deep-set eyes that reflected our firelight as empty hollows, and a smile that stretched too wide across his face. None of us spoke. We just stared, frozen, as he stood there watching us. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds before Thomas finally cleared his throat. Hello there," he called out, his voice higher than normal. The man's head tilted slightly, that unsettling smile never wavering. "Evening," he replied, his voice surprisingly normal, which somehow made it worse. "Nice night for camping." "Yeah," Thomas responded automatically. "Are you camping around here too?" The man shook his head slowly. "Just passing through," he said, gesturing vaguely behind him. "Saw your fire. It made no sense. We were miles from any main trail or road. The nearest town was over an hour's drive away. No one just passes through here, especially not after dark." "Well," Ethan said, clearly trying to sound casual, "we've got some hot dogs left if you're hungry." I shot him a panicked look. The last thing I wanted was this stranger joining us, but Ethan was always the diplomatic one. The man's smile widened, if that was even possible. "No, thank you. I've already eaten." He stood there for another moment, his eyes moving slowly from face to face, before adding, "Enjoy your night, boys. The valley gets quiet after dark." With that, he stepped backward, melting into the shadows beyond our firelight so quickly it was like he'd disappeared. We sat there in stunned silence for several seconds. "What the actual fuck?" Avery finally whispered. "Probably just some local weirdo," Thomas said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Maybe a hunter or something." "In jeans and a flannel shirt?" I argued. "With no gear, no flashlight, in the middle of nowhere at night?" We discussed it for another hour, voices kept low as if afraid he might still be listening. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had a campsite nearby we hadn't noticed. Maybe he was one of those survivalist types who lived off the grid. Maybe he was just hiking and got lost. None of the explanations felt right. Eventually we decided to turn in, but not before adding extra wood to the fire. Nobody wanted it to go out during the night. I remember lying in the tent beside Avery, listening to every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, wondering if our visitor was still out there, watching. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew it was morning. The forest looked completely different in daylight, less threatening, more like the peaceful getaway we'd planned. We laughed off our fears from the night before as we cooked breakfast over a fresh fire. "Seriously, though," Thomas said through a mouthful of instant oatmeal, "that guy was creepy as hell." "Let's just forget about it," Ethan suggested. "We've got the whole day ahead of us. I want to try fishing in that stream." We spent the morning exploring the area around our campsite. The stream widened into a small pool about a quarter-mile downstream, perfect for swimming. The day was warming up, and soon we were taking turns diving into the cold water, shouting and laughing like nothing had happened. It wasn't until we returned to camp for lunch that Ethan noticed something was wrong. "Hey, has anyone seen my lantern?" he asked, rummaging through his tent. "The battery-powered one I brought?" None of us had. We helped him search the entire campsite, but the lantern, a decent-sized camping light he'd placed at the foot of his sleeping bag, was nowhere to be found. "Maybe you left it at the pool?" Avery suggested. "I never took it there," Ethan insisted. "I remember seeing it in the tent this morning when I woke up." A sick feeling started forming in my stomach. "Could an animal have taken it?" I asked, knowing how ridiculous that sounded even as I said it. What, like a lantern-collecting raccoon? Thomas scoffed. It didn't just walk away by itself. We all knew what that meant, but no one wanted to say it. Someone had been in our camp while we were gone. Someone had been in Ethan's tent. It's probably that guy from last night, Avery finally said, voicing what we were all thinking. We tried to stay rational. Maybe we'd misplaced it. Maybe it had fallen out when we were grabbing something else. We searched again, more thoroughly this time. But deep down, I think we all knew. The rest of the day passed uneasily. We stayed together, no one wanting to be alone. We tried to enjoy ourselves, fishing, exploring, telling jokes, but there was this constant tension, a feeling of being watched that never quite went away. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees, convinced I would see that thin figure standing there with his too wide smile. As the sun began to set, we debated whether to leave that night or wait until morning. Thomas argued that driving those rough roads in the dark was too dangerous. Ethan thought staying was riskier. It's just a lantern, he said, not sounding convinced. Maybe it fell in the stream or something. In the end, we decided to stay one more night, but to take turns keeping watch. We built the fire up higher than the night before, creating a wider circle of light around our camp. I volunteered for the first watch while the others tried to sleep. Sitting alone by the fire, every sound in the forest seemed amplified. The stream's gurgle now sounded like whispers. The wind in the trees became footsteps. I kept the flashlight in my hand, ready to shine it into the darkness at the slightest provocation. About an hour into my watch, I heard it, a distinct crack of a branch breaking, too heavy to be an animal. I stood up, heart pounding, and aimed my flashlight in the direction of the sound. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the exact same spot as the night before, at the edge of the clearing, but this time he didn't approach. He just stood there, perfectly still, watching me. And in his hand, hanging loosely at his side, was Ethan's lantern. I couldn't move. I couldn't call out to wake the others. I just stood there, flashlight beam fixed on his hollow eyes as he stared back at me. His smile widened when he saw I'd noticed the lantern, and he slowly raised it up, as if showing it off. Then he switched it on. The sudden additional light illuminated his face from below, creating deep shadows that made him look even more skeletal. He held it there for several seconds, that smile never faltering, before switching it off and backing away into the trees. This time, I know he didn't leave. I could feel him out there, watching. I woke Avery for his shift without telling him what I'd seen. I couldn't form the words. I just mumbled something about being tired and crawled into the tent, where I lay wide awake, listening. About 20 minutes later, I heard Avery's panicked voice calling everyone's name. I scrambled out of the tent to find him standing exactly where I had been, flashlight pointed into the trees. "He's out there," Avery was saying, his voice shaking. I saw him, just standing there, watching. Thomas and Ethan emerged from their tent, disoriented from being woken up. "We need to leave," I said firmly. "Now." No one argued. We packed up as quickly as we could, leaving the fire burning as we stuffed sleeping bags and cookware haphazardly into our packs. The entire time, I could feel eyes on us from the darkness, watching our frantic movements with that same unnatural patience. We didn't even bother properly putting out the fire, just kicked some dirt over it and hoped for the best. With flashlights in hand, we started back down the trail toward the car, moving faster than was safe on the uneven ground. The forest felt different at night. The trail that had seemed straightforward during the day now twisted confusingly in our flashlight beams. Several times we had to stop and check Thomas's map, huddled together, jumpy at every sound. About halfway back to the car, Thomas suddenly froze mid-step. "Do you guys hear that?" he whispered. We all went still, listening. At first I didn't hear anything besides our own breathing and the distant sound of the stream. Then it came, a soft, rhythmic sound behind us on the trail. Footsteps. We ran. There was no discussion, no plan, just pure instinct taking over as we crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. I don't know how long we ran before we burst out onto the dirt road where we'd parked, gasping for breath. Ethan fumbled with his keys, hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice before managing to unlock the car. We threw our packs into the trunk and piled in, Ethan cranking the engine before all the doors were even closed. As we pulled away, I looked back through the rear window. There, at the edge of our headlights' reach, standing in the middle of the trail we'd just fled down, was the tall, thin figure. He raised one hand, not in farewell but in acknowledgement. In his other hand, Ethan's lantern glowed brightly. We didn't speak much on the drive back, each lost in our own thoughts, jumping at every set of headlights that appeared in the rearview mirror. It wasn't until we were back on the main highway, surrounded by the comforting signs of civilization, that anyone broke the silence. "Let's agree never to talk about this weekend," Thomas said, his voice hoarse. But I can't stop thinking about it, about him, about those hollow eyes and that unnatural smile, about how he got Ethan's lantern from inside our tent, about why he chose to reveal himself to us, to watch us, to chase us away. I keep wondering, was he human? I know how that sounds, but if you'd seen him, seen the way he moved, the way he just appeared and disappeared. I don't know what to believe anymore. Sometimes I think I see him, just at the corner of my vision. A tall, thin figure standing perfectly still, watching me with those empty eyes. When I turn to look, no one's there, but the feeling of being watched lingers. I haven't been camping since. I don't think I ever will again, and I've learned to keep my windows closed at night, especially when the wind sounds like whispers through the trees. Because sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear footsteps approaching my door. And sometimes, through the crack beneath it, I think I see the faint glow of a lantern. I still can't shake what happened during our camping trip last month. I keep running it over in my mind, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. My wife says I need to talk about it, get it out somehow. Maybe writing it down will help. It was supposed to be a simple family getaway. Sarah and I had been planning it for weeks, our first real camping trip with the kids. Tommy is 7 and Emma just turned 5, and we thought they were finally old enough to appreciate the outdoors. I grew up camping, but Sarah's more of a hotel person. She agreed to give it a shot after I showed her pictures of Riverwood National Park. The place looked perfect, not too remote, but far enough from the city to see the stars. Family-friendly trails, a peaceful river for fishing, and plenty of designated campsites. We arrived at Riverwood around 3 p.m. on Saturday. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a slight breeze. The ranger at the entrance booth was friendly enough, giving us a map and pointing out the best spots for families. We drove about 20 minutes into the park, following signs to the Pine Creek campground. There were maybe a dozen other campsites in the area, but most were empty. We picked site 14, close to the creek, and backed up against a dense section of forest. Setting up camp was fun. Tommy helped me pitch our big family tent while Sarah and Emma collected kindling for the fire. The tent was one of those big cabin-style ones with a divider in the middle, parents on one side, kids on the other. We got everything set up with plenty of daylight left, so we decided to explore a little. The creek was only about 200 feet from our site, with a well-worn path leading down to a small pebbly beach. We spent a couple hours there, skipping rocks and letting the kids splash around in the shallow parts. Everything felt so normal, so peaceful. I remember thinking how perfect it all was. We headed back to the campsite around 6 p.m. to start dinner. I fired up our portable grill and made hot dogs while Sarah prepared some corn and beans. The kids were excited to roast marshmallows after dinner. The sun started setting around 7:30, and that's when I first noticed something felt off. I can't really explain it. Just a weird sensation, like when you think someone's watching you. I scanned the tree line but didn't see anything unusual. I brushed it off as typical woods paranoia, city folk getting spooked by nature sounds. But the feeling didn't go away. By 8:30 we had a good campfire going. The kids were roasting marshmallows and telling silly ghost stories. I kept glancing at the woods, especially as it got darker. There was still one other family about 4 sites down from us, but I couldn't see their campfire anymore from our angle. Around 9 p.m. we put the kids to bed in the tent. They were exhausted from all the fresh air and excitement. Sarah and I stayed by the fire, talking quietly and enjoying some beers. That's when I first heard it, footsteps crunching on leaves, somewhere in the woods behind our tent. "Did you hear that?" I asked Sarah. She shook her head, still sipping her beer. "Probably just a deer or something." I nodded, trying to convince myself she was right. But deer don't usually approach campsites, and these footsteps sounded deliberate, heavy, like someone trying to walk quietly but not quite succeeding. I stood up, shining my flashlight toward the woods. The beam only penetrated about 20 feet before the darkness swallowed it. "Hello?" I called out, not too loud to avoid waking the kids. No response. Sarah put her hand on my arm. "You're freaking me out, Mike. It's nothing." I sat back down, but I couldn't relax. The fire was dying down, and the woods seemed to press in closer around us. That's when I heard it again, footsteps circling around toward the back of our tent. I jumped up again. "Someone's out there," I whispered urgently. Sarah looked scared now. "Should we pack up and leave?" I hesitated. It was nearly 10 p.m., pitch black, and we had 2 sleeping kids. "Let me check it out first," I said, grabbing the heavy metal flashlight from the picnic table. I walked slowly around our campsite, scanning the darkness. When I reached the back of the tent, I saw nothing unusual, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, listening. Crickets, distant frogs from the creek, the soft breathing of our kids inside the tent. Nothing else. "See? Nothing there," Sarah said when I returned to the fire, but her voice sounded unconvinced. We decided to turn in around 10:30. I made sure the fire was completely out, secured our food in the car to keep animals away, and we crawled into our side of the tent. The kids were sound asleep, Tommy snoring softly, Emma clutching her stuffed rabbit. I lay there for what felt like hours, unable to sleep. Sarah dozed off eventually, but I kept alert, listening. Around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling our tent. Then silence. Then a sound that made my skin crawl, something brushing against the outside of the tent, right where the kids were sleeping. A soft, sliding sound, like fingers tracing the fabric. I held my breath, reaching for the flashlight I'd placed beside our sleeping bags. The sound continued, moving around the tent's perimeter. I nudged Sarah awake. "Someone's touching the tent," I whispered, barely audible. Her eyes widened in the darkness. We lay completely still, listening. The touching stopped, replaced by silence so complete it was deafening. Then came a different sound, a faint scratching at the tent door. We'd zipped it closed from the inside, securing the flap with the Velcro strips as well. The scratching continued for several seconds, then stopped. I sat up slowly, flashlight clutched in my hand, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake the kids. Sarah gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. What happened next will haunt me forever. The tent zipper, the main entrance, began to move. Slowly, teeth by tiny metal teeth, it started unzipping from the outside. There was no mistaking it. Someone or something was trying to get in. I lunged forward, grabbing the zipper from inside to prevent it from opening further. It had only moved about 6 inches, not enough to see outside. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite my terror. Silence. Then, so quiet I almost missed it, a raspy whisper. "Let me in." My blood turned to ice. Sarah gasped beside me. The voice didn't sound quite human. It was dry, like leaves rustling, but formed clear words. "Get the hell away from our tent," I shouted, forgetting about not waking the kids. Tommy stirred on the other side of the divider. The response was immediate and terrifying. The entire tent began to shake violently, as if someone was grabbing the poles and rocking them back and forth. Emma woke up crying, Tommy soon joining her. "What's happening, Daddy?" Tommy cried out. "It's okay, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just the wind. Go back to sleep." But it wasn't the wind. The shaking continued for about 10 seconds, then abruptly stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard that raspy voice again, clearer this time. "Let me in. I'm cold." Sarah scrambled to the kids' section, pulling them both close to her. I reached into my backpack and grabbed my camping knife, a good-sized blade I'd brought for cutting rope and branches. "I'm calling the police," I said loudly, though I knew full well we had no cell service out here. Another silence followed. Then the tent shook again, more violently this time. Emma was sobbing now, and Tommy looked paralyzed with fear. "That's it," I said. "We're getting out of here." I made a split-second decision. Whatever was out there, we couldn't stay trapped in the tent. I gripped the knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, and approached the tent door. "Sarah, when I go out, zip it behind me and don't open it unless I tell you to," I instructed. "No, Mike, don't go out there," Sarah pleaded. "We can't stay in here," I insisted. "I need to see what we're dealing with." Before she could argue further, I unzipped the door and stepped outside, immediately sweeping the flashlight beam in a wide arc around the campsite. Nothing. The beam illuminated our picnic table, the dead fire pit, our cooler, the edge of the forest, all empty. "Hello?" I called out, knife held at the ready. "I know someone's out there." The woods remained silent except for normal night sounds. No footsteps, no movement, nothing unusual. Had I imagined it all? Then I heard it. The same raspy whisper, but now coming from the tree line about 30 feet away. "Let me in, I'm so cold." I swung the flashlight toward the voice, but saw nothing. Just trees and darkness. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, trying to mask my fear with anger. No response, just the feeling of being watched from the darkness. I circled the tent completely, inspecting every angle. There were no footprints, no signs anyone had been there. But I knew what I'd heard, what we'd all heard. I returned to the tent entrance. "Sarah, get the kids dressed. We're leaving right now." She didn't argue. Within minutes, they were all outside, huddled together. The kids were still in their pajamas, but we'd thrown jackets over them. Sarah had our emergency bag, water bottles, snacks, first aid kit. "What about our stuff?" she asked. "Leave it. We can come back tomorrow with the Rangers." We moved quickly to our car, about 50 feet from the campsite. I kept scanning the woods with my flashlight, seeing nothing unusual but feeling watched from every direction. The kids were quiet now, sensing the seriousness of the situation. I unlocked the car with shaking hands, getting everyone inside. I slid into the driver's seat, inserted the key, and turned it. Nothing. The engine didn't even try to turn over, not even a click. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, panic rising in her voice. "I don't know." I tried again. Still nothing. The car was completely dead, as if the battery had been removed. "This is impossible," I muttered. The car had been fine just hours earlier. That's when Tommy pointed toward the woods. "Daddy, someone's there." I followed his gaze, shining the flashlight toward the trees. For a split second, I thought I saw movement, something pale ducking behind a trunk. The flashlight beam flickered, then went out completely. "Shit," I muttered, banging the flashlight against my palm. It remained dead. "What do we do now?" Sarah whispered, clutching both kids. I made another split-second decision. "We walk. The ranger station is about 2 miles back toward the entrance. We stick to the road, stay together." So that's what we did. We abandoned everything, the tent, our supplies, all of it, and started walking down the dark park road. I carried Emma, who was too terrified to walk. Tommy held Sarah's hand, being incredibly brave for a 7-year-old. The walk was the longest of my life. The road was pitch black, winding through dense forest. We had no light except the faint moonlight filtering through the trees and the tiny flashlight on Sarah's keychain, which cast a pathetic glow a few feet ahead of us. Several times I heard sounds from the woods, branches breaking, leaves rustling. Each time I called out, and each time silence followed. But the feeling of being followed never left. About halfway to the ranger station, Emma suddenly stiffened in my arms. "The whispery man is behind us," she said matter-of-factly. I whirled around, seeing nothing on the dark road. "There's no one there, sweetie." "He's in the trees," she insisted, pointing to the dense forest beside the road. "He's following us." I picked up our pace, practically jogging now despite the weight of carrying Emma. Sarah and Tommy struggled to keep up. We finally saw lights ahead, the ranger station, illuminated by security floodlights. I've never been so relieved to see artificial light in my life. We burst into the station, startling the night ranger who was sitting at the desk doing paperwork. I blurted out our story as coherently as I could. The ranger, a middle-aged man named Davis, looked skeptical but concerned. He called in another ranger who was on patrol, and they drove us back to our campsite with flashlights and a shotgun. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. Tent still standing, supplies untouched. Even the car started immediately when the ranger tried it. They searched the surrounding woods but found nothing unusual. No footprints, no signs of anyone being there. The rangers clearly thought we'd spooked ourselves, but they were kind enough not to say it outright. They helped us pack up our gear and escorted us to a motel outside the park, where we spent the rest of the night. It's been a month, and I still can't explain what happened. Sarah thinks it might have been some homeless person or a prankster, but that doesn't explain the car not starting, or the voice, or the way the presence seemed to follow us. The kids have mostly bounced back, the way kids do, though Emma still talks about the whispery man sometimes. I've had trouble sleeping. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd given in to curiosity or fear, if I'd just let it in, like it asked. We left a perfectly good tent and some other gear at the ranger station. I can't bring myself to go back for it, and Sarah doesn't push the issue. I keep checking online for any strange reports from Riverwood National Park, but I've found nothing similar to our experience. I don't know what was out there that night, maybe I never will, but I know what I heard, what we all heard, And sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I still hear that raspy whisper, "Let me in, I'm so cold." I won't ever let it in, whatever it is.